My name is Joanne Sanchez. Today is March 29th, 2001. We are here at the home of Abel Ortega in San Antonio, Texas, and he is being interviewed for the U.S. Latino and Latina World War II Oral History Project. Thank you, Mr. Ortega, for participating in this project. We really appreciate it.
Mr. Ortega, I'd like to start out by asking you about your favorite experiences of your childhood.
My favorite experiences of the childhood is that I was uh, of a large family, and my older brothers didn't want to play with me because I was too young, and my other younger brothers didn't want to play with me because I was too old for them. So I was always the loner in the family, and as a loner, I would rock on the chair in our front room, rocking. And as I was rocking, I was thinking about the Far East, China, Japan, and all the Far East nations that I would never get to see because I would see pictures in the magazines of the Chinese women with the little feet and the Japanese in their kimonos, and I say I would never get to see because my father is not a rich man, so I didn't expect to ever go and visit these countries. So I would rock in my chair, thinking about this. And my brother, the older brother, would come by and they'd look at me rocking. And they would say, "Oh, the big thinker! Look at the big thinker!" You know, they call me the thinker because I was always thinking and rocking his chair. But these other countries, even my father would call me the big thinker as I was thinking there. Well, uh, later on in life, I was thinking of ways to reach the Far East. My opportunities came when I was in the army. And when I was in the army, I took my training in Fort Knox, Kentucky. I came to Louisiana at Camp Polk, which was a new base, army base that just started. And and on one of the occasions, they asked for volunteers, so they brought the whole battalion to the field, and we were all lined up, and they asked for volunteers to go to the Far East, to the Philippine Islands, and this was my opportunity. So the colonel asked that all those that would want to volunteer to go to the Far East, to the Philippine Islands, to step forward. I saw this as my opportunity. So I was one of the first to step forward immediately as a volunteer to go to the Philippine Islands. And so we there was a tank company. There was a tank company in Louisiana on maneuvers at the time, and that's who I joined, the 192nd Tank Company, which you go overseas. And we arrived at the quarter in Manila in the Philippine Islands on Thanksgiving Day of 1941.
So this was before Pearl Harbor.
Yes, this was before Pearl Harbor. I arrived there 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor on Thanksgiving Day of 1941.
And what were you doing when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, we were, of course, cleaning all of our equipment when we arrived in the Philippine Islands. In those days, they used cosmoline on all of your equipment, the rifles and the submachine guns that we used, and etc. And we had to clean this cosmoline. That's because of the on the sea air, they didn't want these equipment to rust, so we had to clean it off, and that was
like
our
ointment or
it's like a grease,
uh-huh.
and we boil them in water. Boil water and put the guns or the submachine guns or whatever in this hot water, and it would melt all of the cotton off of it. And that's what we were doing there. By the way, Thanksgiving Day, I didn't have any turkey. There was no turkey. We landed Thanksgiving Day. And as I arrived at Fort Sassenberg there in the Philippines, next to Clark Airport Base, I had a friend from my hometown, Joel Reese, who was there at Fort Sassenberg, so I looked him up. I told him, I said, this is Thanksgiving Day, Joel, and I haven't had anything to eat all day since we had to unload all the ships. So he went into his kitchen and got me a piece of bread with a little gravy on. So in 1941, all I had was a piece of bread with a little gravy on it. But we heard that, on December 8th, we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And that really shook us up. We didn't realize, that something like that would happen. So our officers lined us up and told us to go and disperse all of our tanks, half tracks, into the jungles around Clark Airport, camouflage them, just in case. As a rule, that's what you should do anyway. And so, since I was new to the organization, I had volunteered to this organization. They put me and another fellow from Oklahoma to guard all these tanks and half tracks out there in the jungle while everybody else went to eat. It was at noon, and everybody was eating when they were told to disperse their tanks and their half tracks and their equipment. So we stayed out there, my friend and I, guarding all this equipment while everybody went across the the runaways to go to where our tents were. We lived in tents. We didn't have any housing yet. They were building our housing.
And this was Fort Stassenberg?
Fort Stassenberg was the name, but it was right there at Clark Air Force Base.
In the middle of the jungle.
Well, at the place where Clark Air Force Base was, it was in central Luzon. And as we were there guarding these tanks while everybody ran across the runway to go eat, and their mess kits were rattling as they were running across the runaways, and I had the command half track. In other words, I drove the captain around the command half track. By the grace of God, I come from a Christian family, and God grace was upon me. I always seemed to be at the right place at the right time. And so while we were there guarding these tanks and half tracks and equipment, there in the jungle, camouflage, I heard a humming noise. And I looked around, and my friend looked around to where all this noise, and it grew louder and louder and louder. And finally, it got the humming noise got so loud, and we looked up into the sky. And as we looked up into the sky, we could see airplanes, bombers, coming over Clark Air Force Base. And as they were coming over, we heard hissing sounds. Hissing sounds that go through the air. Thousands of them. And we look at these airplanes, and but before that we said, oh, wow, great. The American Army Air Force is coming to rescue. They bombed Pearl Harbor. And here are these airplanes from the American Army Air Force are coming over here to Clark, to prepare themselves to war against the Japanese. Well, to our surprise, these airplanes were not American airplanes, because one of our men had some eyeglasses. I learned this later on. Had some glasses to where he could see, and under the wing was a red circle. He said, these are not American airplanes. He said, Japanese bombers coming over our camps. Well, the bombs started falling huge. They would explode all on the airfield. At that particular time, there was a lot of Japanese spies on the islands. And they caught the Americans with all their planes there at Clark on the ground, the fighter planes and everything. And I assume their spies notified the Japanese Army Air Force of the situation, so that was the right time for them to come over and bomb all of these planes that were on the ground. I had a 50 caliber machine gun on my half track and a 30 caliber. So I assumed it was my responsibility to do what I could with what I had. And as the bombs fell, the shrapnel would come through the jungle, and it would just cut down the trees, and devastation of bombs bursting all around Clark Air Force Base. Black smoke was billowing all over the airfield. Planes were being shot at the ground, and fires were everywhere. And I was out there, and I had my 50 caliber. So during the black smoke, after the bombers went through, the fighter planes came out. The Japanese fighters came in to devastate all that was on the ground and finish the work of the bombardment. And I would get my 50 caliber, and I would fire at all these planes when I could see them as they come through the clouds. I would fire my 50 caliber. I couldn't tell whether I hit them because there was so much smoke. If I would fire, they would disappear into the smoke. So I wouldn't know whether, but some did get shot down there at the airfield.
And what did the commanding officer do? Did he send more people out to shoot at the planes, or?
No, ma'am. It was complete chaos. You see, we had not dug any kind of a foxhole.
We better cut.
I'll add it to the page.
The war has started, but Japan had not declared war. And we had not had opportunity to dig foxholes to protect ourselves in case of bombing or whatever. So a lot of the men were caught unawares. And they tell me that at Pearl Harbor, thousands were killed, But we also suffered great amount of casualties there, also hundreds too, at Clark Air Force Base. Now, not only did they bomb and spray Clark, but there was Nichols Field was another field, airfield there in the Philippine Islands, where they also bombed and sprayed and tried to bring a lot of damage to the airplanes that were there, and so it was I would say this, that I was one of the persons that was firing at all these airplanes while the others did not have the opportunity to go and get their guns or whatever they had available at the time to fire on these Japanese airplanes, but I did.
So,
And,
about how many people were out there firing at the planes?
very few, ma'am. We had the 200th Coast Artillery from New Mexico there, made up mostly of Mexican Americans and Indians from New Mexico. They were in the anti-aircraft, but they had little 37 millimeter, and they didn't even reach when they fired. They didn't even reach the bombers at all. The shells, when they went on, they didn't penetrate enough altitude in order to, hit these airplanes. So the bomb, they were out there in the middle of the airfield with their emplacements. And a friend of mine from Austin, Texas, Hoyo Breeze, was in the 200th, and he told me it was very chaotic there out there trying to fire these small guns at these huge bombers as they was coming over.
And you were in the 192nd.
I was in the tanks, yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
And
how many were there? Other Mexican Americans there?
no, in the 192nd, there was only, as far as I know, 3 Mexican Americans in the whole battalion. There was very few Mexican Americans over there, other than the 200th Coast Artillery, which is made up of a lot of the personnel from El Paso and New Mexico. But other than the regular Army or National Guard, where I was at, there was very few Mexican Americans. Very few.
How were you treated? How did you get?
Oh well, I had no problem now. I had no problems. I would receive well. The captain, our captain, Captain Wright, who they killed almost at the beginning of the war, took a liking to me because I was the only Mexican American there, and he was curious about the Mexican American liking to eat chili, so he had a lot of questions about chili, and I was not a chili eater myself, so I couldn't give him too many answers. My father and mother were very well adapted to that, but not me. I was Americanized, cream wheat, oatmeal, and all of that.
Let's go back to talking about the attack.
They would come every day, the bombers, fly over from Formosa. Now, if the American airplane or the Americans knew that war would break out, they had an opportunity. They would have had an opportunity to go to Formosa and bomb these Japanese planes that were coming from Formosa. But the American intelligence was very, very poor, and they caught all the American planes by surprise. Young that. In fact, there is a story which there was a Japanese bicyclist that would go every morning at Corridor Airport Place. You'd see all of the equipment that the Americans have. Every day he was a Japanese spy on a bicycle. In fact, the Philippine Island was they had plenty of Japanese spies, columnists. I don't know what they call them, fifth columnists, who were there. And naturally, if they were going to attack an island, they were going to prepare and make sure they knew where all of the military units were, and so they had a field day, and the American forces were unaware of all of this preparation with the Japanese. was had in Nordic when before they attacked our Carfield, and they also, as you know, Pearl Harbor, same thing. They came on Sunday, but say you and everybody was either at a church service or they were out in some leisure activity on the beaches, and they knew that the American servicemen were not too aware of having to receive an attack.
So about how many days did they continue with this daily bombing?
Well, they bombed for about 2 weeks. They kept bombing and strafing, and we by that time had started digging our foxholes. In fact, we dug them the next day. We dug our holes in the ground in order for us to be protected by all of this. So we had to stay there, and in case the Japanese dropped paratroopers at Karga Airport Base where I was at, we had to stay there and guard against these paratroopers. But the paratroopers, never came, the Japanese. So they sent most of our units, our tanks, up north to the Lingayen Gulf area, where they expected the Japanese to, to make their landings. And I stayed there in Karga Air Force Base there, guarding for paratroopers while all the tanks went up north. We invaded the post exchange at the time because everything was so sudden that you didn't have opportunity to get your supplies that you needed. The army fights on the stomach. If you don't have food for your soldiers and your air personnel, and whoever is fighting the war, you can't last too long. You have to have food besides bullets and the armaments of war. And so they went up north, and I stayed there in a half track, and we received the daily bombing, the Japanese bombers, and then we, of course, went to the food exchange. We went and gathered all the foods we could find there. There was no authority there at the post exchange. Everybody had scattered, due to the bombings. Civilian employees were all gone. There was nobody there at the exchange. And so we loaded our half tracks with all the food that we could find in the exchange. And we went north to meet with our tank unit that were up north. And then when the Japanese landed at the Lingayen Gulf, and we fought a retreat battle, and there was approximately just about 15,000 Americans, military personnel there.
My.
And you had to resist about 200,000 Japanese troops. So you could see that we were just overwhelmed.
It's amazing.
There's only 2 tank battalions there, and that's about 12 tanks to a battalion. So that's all the armor we had. And of course we had the Philippine cavalry with their horses, but in modern warfare, horses will move down real quick, and they're very ineffective, in war. So, of course, we struggled there. We had no supplies available. The Japanese, in their quick attack, surrounded all our supplies that were being shipped to the peninsula of Bataan, where we had to defend ourselves there in the Bataan Peninsula.
So what did you have to eat? Were there
Well,
was there a
we
hospital?
ate all the horses of the cavalry.
Uh-huh.
We ate all the water buffalo that we could find. We ate all the monkeys and all the snakes and everything else that's moved in order to stay alive. Of course, we had to sustain ourselves because of all the tropical diseases that we had to face since we lived in the we had to live in the jungle. We retreated into the jungles, and I remember one time we was hungry. We saw a monkey way up in the tree, so we shouted down. We were going to eat the monkey, but they skinned it and they held it up, a skin, and it looked so much like a young baby that we discarded the idea of eating the monkey. He looked too much like a human being. But it was a struggle. We even robbed our own army trucks to get any kind of food that came on that truck. You know, it was a horrible ordeal there.
What about the water supply or hospitals?
Well,
for
we
the
had plenty
wounded?
of water. The jungle, there's a lot of rivers and a lot of water available there.
And was there a hospital yet?
Yes, we had a hospital, and they all of the wounded were there, of course, there, and we had nurses there also, you know, and but it was a terrible situation there with no food available. You run out of ammunition. Not only that, we used World War One ammunition, and some of that didn't be fire at all.
Wow.
All of the equipment, all of our soldiers' equipment was World War One equipment. We had the World War One helmets. It wasn't the helmets that they use nowadays. And he had canvas legging, you know. And it was. I remember now. I'm going to go into. We resisted the Japanese. Bataan is a peninsula. The peninsula is surrounded by water on three sides. That's what a peninsula is. The Japanese would make landings on this peninsula, and we would drive them all off. And they were all annihilated. Any Japanese that landed there in Bataan Peninsula, well, we annihilated with the help of the Filipino troops that were there. Now, in the Philippine Army, they had some well-seasoned troops. They were called the Scouts, the Philippine Scouts. The rest of the armed Philippine army were never organized. They were never trained, so they were ill trained. So they mainly just never. They abandoned their posts. They never stayed to face the enemy. They ran off. So it just depended upon the American forces and the Philippine Scouts to defend their country. So,
About how long were you in retreat there in the Bataan Peninsula?
well, when the Japanese landed, it took about 10, 12, 15 days to retreat to Bataan. And there was a retreat. Of course, the tanks held the positions while the infantry pulled back. And they didn't pull back in trucks or anything like that, like we did in Korea, say. But we retreated. The Turks came. We retreated. You know, some walked. You know, but we stood our position, held the Japanese till the infantry retreated. Then we come back, retreated. It took about 12 days to retreat into the Bataan Peninsula. The Bataan Peninsula was where we were going to make our stand anyway. The other positions here were not positions that were capable of defense. So we had to go into.
What about Manila?
Manila was an open city. And no, there was no defense there. There was no way of defending Manila. So the main defense was set up there in the Bataan Peninsula.
Tell me then what happened that eventually led to the Japanese taking surrender and the surrender to
Well, we
General Yamashita.
as I explained, our troops began to receive all of the tropical diseases that were there due to lack of food, lack of of all of the medical equipment and supplies were all confiscated by the Japanese for to be hurried into Bataan. All was captured by the Japanese, foodstuffs and everything. So we were there without any real medical help there, and our shortage of food, we had to, like I said before, we had to even kill all the cavalry horses to eat. All of the wild animals in the jungle we was killed to eat. All the monkeys, the snakes, and whatever we could find to survive. So that weakened us, and weakened a lot of those who were not adapted to hunting or receiving, or were in a position to receive this type of food.
And what types of diseases were people?
Well, all the tropical diseases, malaria, all dysentery, yellow jaundice, and all of the diseases that accompany the tropical diseases.
Did you have a?
We have a lot of mosquitoes there, malaria. Yes.
Did you have a makeshift hospital in the?
There was a hospital there.
Peninsula.
But you had to hold your position. You couldn't. Everybody go to the hospital. You had to stay there, and
So even people who were very sick were there trying.
yes, we had to stay there and fight. We couldn't go to. Had to hold our position, and we held it the best. We with Corregidor, we lasted 5 months fighting with Japan. Yes, 5 months. Pearl Harbor was just 1 day. Yes, but we had fallen off for 5 days without any help from the United States of America.
For 5 months.
For 5 months, without any help from anybody, anything. All our planes were shot down, and all the ships were blown out of sea by the Japanese. And enormous fleets that they had at that time. We had no way of receiving any kind of help from the United States. Philippine Islands, 7,000 miles away from the United States. So we had to survive on our own. And so we did for 5 months. For 5 months, we fought the Japanese. So our officers and some of our officers decided that it was no use really to sacrifice all these men. MacArthur said that we have to fight till death, Well, he was over there in Australia, drinking his tea while we was over there trying to survive. So our generals were ordered to fight into the end, but they decided that they were the best. Wainwright was our general and top commander. We decided to maybe we could survive, some of us could survive this onslaught, Like I said before, there was only 15,000 American soldiers. And, of course, those in the Army Air Force, plus what little Navy that was there. The Marines that fought in China, well, they ended up in the Philippine Islands. I don't know if you ever read about the Marines that were in China, the 4th Marines. Well, they ended up there with us there. And that's always all the American forces down there in the Philippine Islands. And
about how many Filipinos were?
Well, the Philippine scouts were organized. They were well trained. But then the regular Philippine army was in disarray. They were not trained, well trained. They were not professional soldiers at all. We would come upon and we came upon many artillery pieces, like 75 millimeter. They were abundant. They abandoned the artillery pieces, and they fled. The Philippine army, but they weren't just really professional soldiers at all. They just abandoned their equipment. So it was really a bad situation as far as depending upon the Japanese army to defend their country.
Now, once the surrender came,
Well, I'll tell you how it happened. Well, we had fought off the Japanese on the landings on the Bataan Peninsula. We had fought off and annihilated all their landings. And and my half track, I would have to patrol all of the Bataan Peninsula right next to the China Sea. In case of landing, we would notify the appropriate personnel so they could try to annihilate these landings of the Japanese. And we annihilated all their landings. And but there came a time when you realize, this is there's no use for everyone to die in the jungle, There's no use for us to try to hold on and on and on and have everybody just killed, Maybe, we can survive. Maybe we can get out of this, because we were overwhelmed with arms. There were just too many, 200, 300,000 Japanese fighting 15,000 American troops. That was just too many. We couldn't hold. We did 5 months of warfare, but that was all we could do. So one of our generals, MacArthur, ordered us to die to the last man while he was in Australia. Like I said before, sipping tea, and all that. He wasn't there with us. He didn't know all the suffering and all what was going on among our troops there. So our captain called us all in our company. We all lined up. He said that our officers in command are going to surrender to the Japanese. And maybe some of us will make it through. We'll all have to perish. But we didn't surrender per se as holding up our hand like this. As usual you see in surrender. No. We went, when we were told that we were going to surrender, our officers told us to go back to our equipment and destroy it completely. So we went, and I destroyed the half track. I drove the command half track, and I went and then destroyed the motor and wrecked it. We had an axe.
What was a half track? Was that a tank?
That's a half track and armored personnel carrier. It's armored with a quarter-inch steel all the way around, and it has tracks on the back and 2 wheels in the front. And that's what I drove during the war. And so we all lined up, and the captain told us that we were going to surrender. And so I personally went back to my half track, and when I got to my half track, I kneeled down on the side of the half track, and when I kneeled down, since I came from a Christian home, since I came from a home where I used to go to church all the time, I never missed a Sunday school. I knew about God. I knew all the Bible stories since I was a young person. And so I knew what to do. So I went and I kneeled down and I raised my hand like this. And I said, "Oh God, I don't want to die." Yeah, I was 27 years old. I was young, just beginning. "Oh God, I don't want to die. I want to live. I'm too young to die." I told God. I remember these words plain as if it was in the time that I said, "I'm too young to die. But if you let me live, Lord God, I will live to help my fellow man. I know whatever he's expecting of us, whatever is going to happen to us, whether it's in captivity or whatever, I want you to give me the strength and fortitude to help my fellow man as we go into this experience." And then I had a big cry. I cried. I got it all out. I cried. And then, after I had cried I felt, I felt good. All that just passed. I was ready to accept whatever was expected of uh, of us, and that's the way it was. We destroyed all our equipment before we surrendered, and we just waited for the Japanese to come in and take us. And we was in the jungles, way back into the jungle, and we finally came out to the open roads, and we met, and then got into our trucks and went to Maniveles, which was a town there, and most all of the prisoners met there at the surrender at Maniveles. And at Maniveles, there was, I would say, chaos because we didn't know what to expect of ourselves. We was, and we was there, and we received no orders from anybody, and so it was, it was really an experience that very few have ever suffered. To know that you have committed yourselves to accept a surrender, and you don't know what's expected of you. You have no more authority. At the time, nobody tells you anything. You haven't met the Japanese yet, and you don't know what is expected of you. But uh, at the surrender, as we surrendered, there was a fortified island off of the Bataan Peninsula, which was Corregidor.
Yes.
Now, in Corregidor, they had huge artillery weapons, and they were still firing at the Bataan Peninsula, and the Japanese had, along the coast, they had all their artillery pieces on Bataan firing at Corregidor while we was there at Montevideo. We could hear the firing going on and everything. Now, there was a road that was right in front of the artillery pieces. And this road is what got you out of Maravelis. It's the only road in the jungle there. And so our fellows would, we wired a truck, a 2.5-ton truck. And all of us guys in our company, most of them, not all of them, we boarded this truck and we raced through this in front of all the Japanese artillery on this road to get away, about a 5-mile stretch, to get away from all the artillery shelling that was going on. As the shell was coming in, they would hit some of the Japanese artillery pieces, and we could see the Japanese artillery pieces flying up in there as Corregidor was firing at them. They hadn't surrendered yet. And so we came and we halted. The Japanese halted us at about a 5-mile stretch. We all got off of the truck, and that's where we first met our first Japanese soldiers. And to meet the Japanese soldiers that we met was one of the most heart-shaking things you could imagine. Since these soldiers, Japanese soldiers, were not Christians. They were Buddhists. They were worshippers of the sun. That was their religious belief. They worshiped the sun. They were brutal. They didn't. It was the most horrible thing to meet soldiers that had no respect for life. They would harass you. They would make you. They would strip you down. And I had a bag, and I had an American compass with me. And I said to myself, if I ever was to escape, and I ever going, I want to know which direction to take. So I had an American compass that I had, and I dug a hole in the ground. I put the compass on the ground. I covered up with dirt. Then I put my bags or the little possessions I had on top of it while the Japanese guards came by. See, they were souvenir hungry, and they would take watches or anything they wanted to from you. There was nothing you could do, nothing you could say. They had the rifle, they had the bayonet, and you were first time in your life where you had no authority and no control over your thoughts, no control over what you're going to do or anything other than your faith in God. And that's one thing they could never, never, never take away from me. In all those years that I was as a prisoner of war, it was the prayers of my father and mother and those at my church that prayed in for their people that that I could sense always that I was always at the right place at the right time. I could sense that God was watching over me. But I had to go through that baptism of what I had to go through. I went through it to the hardship, to the hunger, to the brutality of seeing uh, heads cut off by Japanese, and being saw by fellow men who could not keep up with the marches, shot just because they fell out of line. You couldn't urinate or do anything out of line. You had to stay in line. And
This was during the
march. That's the beginning of the march. That's the beginning of the march. He started marching us from that point. When we got off the truck, that's where that march began. There would group us in about 100 men altogether, four abreast, 100. Two Japanese guards, one in front, one in the rear, would take us on the road towards San Fernando. It's a town about 70 or 75 miles further north. But it took us about 10 days to get there. And doing the march was the most horrible thing to witness, to see the brutality of the guards who had no respect for persons who would have no mercy whatsoever. That ain't no what mercy.
what were
You've been officer, ma'am.
What were you given to eat?
They're given anything to eat, man.
Nothing. Not eat or drink.
For 7 days, we had to. We would pass sometimes fields where they had been planted. Maybe they planted turnips, something like that. But you had to run out of a line, where you were marching, and go and try to dig something to eat, and then get back in line. See, well, the Japanese would start shooting everybody, killing everybody who went out. But you had to take that chance. If you're hungry, you would take chances like that. If you're thirsty and you saw an open well, you were so thirsty, you would run, to satisfy your thirst because you was marching in the hot, blistering sun. And
About how hot was it?
Oh, it was 105, 6, 7, 10 degrees. And when you're marching, that makes it so much worse.
So how many hours a day were you required?
You would march all day long. And at night, they would arrest you in barbed enclosure. But so many people, hundreds during the day would come, that you would defecate right there where you were at. There was no place to go. You had to do your thing right there where you. And as you went in, everything would just fill with feces. So you had to stop, sit down, and squat, and to smell all the feces and everything there. And others had come before, and they had to leave themselves, but they had to do it right there. So you went, stepped on it, and everything right there.
And I remember one time there was a Filipino next to me. He got a hold of a little ice, and I think he was going to cook it. He was so hungry. So he built a little fire for the Japanese.
Did not allow anything like that. And as I was there, the Japanese came, and as the Filipino had bending over, kind of to be fire, the Japanese came, and he drove his bayonet right through his back. Oh my God! He got up, and he was laughing, his smiling, not smiling, but laughing at what he had done, you know. And then he would wipe this bayonet off with the blood off, you know, slide that. And they had other Americans who were weak and couldn't make the march, and they would fall to the ground. And they resisted, some of them resisted the Japanese. The Japanese would put up a post and practice a bayonet on, and they would fall, and the Japanese would power down. See, in the Japanese code, you're not supposed to fall down. Not supposed to fall down if you're talking to a Japanese. And we were treated like as a Japanese soldier when beat their own. You couldn't fall down. On one occasion, I was in barracks. This was dead long. And we were at night, and every night we had roll call. So we had to go out in front of our places where we stayed, and the Japanese would count everybody off to see everybody there. Then we could go in and to our place that he would provide a bunch of bandaged fat. Well, it was. And on one occasion, 3 of us was the last ones to, when they called for a roll call, they were the last ones to come out of the barrack. And the Japanese called to us to hurry up. Hayako! Please hurry up. I don't know. We did hurry up, I guess, as fast as you want. So we got into line, and then he went and called for those last 3 people to come out. And nobody said, nobody wanted, everybody expected us to be people. So nobody would answer, but we had a little code, more or less, among the prisoners that if you did anything wrong, that you had to speak up, because otherwise they would punish the whole, all the men there. And so I had 2 others. We spoke up to the men and everybody else to be punished, you know, kind of what the Japanese said being done. So we stood up in front of him. They have a bayonet, and it has a metal scamps, but he cooked it bayonet. And then we were standing there in front of him. We had to stand at attention, you know. Of course, we had to learn how to march. We had to learn in Japanese, and we had to form. We had to learn all the Japanese training has the attention, you know, right face, left face, forward march. We had to learn all that in Japanese, because the Japanese were not going to learn English, you know, did they? And so we had to learn their instructions, you know, military instructions. So we stood at attention there, and he whacked one of the fellows there. I was in the center.
Turn it over.
Yeah.
What happened after you arrived from this 10 or 12-day death march to San Fernando? What happened more?
When we arrived in San Fernando, we waited several days until we got some railroad box cars, and they loaded us into box cars, and we were going to be shipped to uh, in our first well, it wasn't really. It was an old Filipino, not barracks because there were Neva huts and all there were. But they had started to train the Philippine Army. Never did finish making the arrangements for the place there. Yeah, that's where we when they owned down the main the town, and we were going to be. They put us in boxcars. It was so they just pushed us.
So how many people were in each car?
Oh, I don't know, but it was so packed. It was so packed that
And this was in the
it
queue.
was. Oh yes, and the heat. Yes, in April it's very hot, and it was so tight inside the boxcar. They would close the doors and lock us so we could escape or get out. And it was so tight, bodies were so tight that some died in such a crushing heat that that it was just a hard one.
And what happened to the dead?
Well, they would just thrown out. And the I don't know what happened after they were thrown out of the boxcar. We kept going, and we arrived at a certain point, and then we had to walk, I don't know, maybe quite a few miles to the first camp from there. And when we got there, we got a lecture from the commanding Japanese, the commander of the cancer, and he would start around, and he would make a speech there, and we were there, letting us know about the great imperial Japanese, and they were the conquerors of Asia, and now he gave a big speech of raising up the consciousness, bragging on stuff. In other words, simply saying
In English.
oh yeah,
Yes, he did.
you know, he had an interpreter there too,
Uh-huh.
because all the Japanese didn't know how to speak, but he had an interpreter, and he would really put down the Americans, the prisoners, and that's but the white people, you put down the white people, write them like persons, you know, on the enemies of Japan. Oh, he would really say a speech there that tried to really say that the Japanese are going to conquer all of Asia, and then said a lot of things. Amen. And so we listened, you know, but we had no, we knew that our country was not ready to go anyway. But when it was ready, that, you know, that he would recant, or he would become a war criminal after the war would move. But at the time, we just had to suffer his speech that he made. That camp there was not even a camp. We slept on the ground there. Some of them got to sleep or stay there in some of the
nipa huts. But most of them, there were so many prisoners that they had to sleep on the ground. There was no food. There was no water. There was only one little hydrant. And everybody was thirsty when they got to camp, so the line was long. We had our canteen. They permitted us to have our canteens to get warmth. And they started dying there at the camp. In fact, hundreds died on the Death March. Well, from Malevelis to Fernando. Hundreds died on the march. And from Fernando to this Odao, they started dying about 100 every day. And since I was in real better shape, health state, see, I come from the other kind. All my brothers were in sports. In fact, I think I mentioned before that one of my brothers still holds the record of the Reds at Texas. More hits in the games. And we played Bateman and baseball. The first Mexican American to play me, even I should say. And one of the schools there in Dawson is named after one of my brothers, and that is our Turkish year.
What we can do, Mr. Ortega, is after we talk about the war, let's switch back and we'll talk about your family because I would love to have that on tape.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And
But anyway, at that camp, there you had to line up for water for canteen, and there were long lines. And then there was the fighting going on in line. Others were trying to use what authority they had, but there was no authority at all. Officers were trying to get in line, try to, say, "Well, I'm an officer. I'm going to get first here and get my water." But
so men were fighting over the water.
Yes, over, yes. And the enlisted men, they didn't care nothing. I'm carrying off, we need water just like anybody else, We get in line just like everybody else. In fact, there was a general in one of the huts that was observing, while men were trying to get water. And he reprimanded his officer. "You let these enlisted men discard your not for you. If you don't want to get scored more dry, boy, you get back in line where you belong, and get in line with the enlisted man." But they died there, and I was on some of the details that were going to have to bury some of these men that died there. Some would give up hope. A lot of death came that men would give up hope.
Would you say there were hundreds dying a day, or?
Yes, they died. That's including all the Filipino soldiers too over there, close by. And I went back when we would take these men that died, and of course there was stench. You smell. We had nobody would bathe the days, and if you did number two, you did it in your pants. You had dysentery. We had no time to go anywhere. Either place, there was no place where you could go. You had defecation or you were standing, and so it horrible experience. And I remember I had to on a detail to go and bury some of those that died, and we didn't have no rope, nothing to pick them up with, and so we would get the Quejon grass, which is similar to our Johnson grass, but it's a big, taller grass. I would kind of make a rope, and I would tie a hand and make a handle with the grass, and another person would get the other hand. Another person would tie grass to the boat onto a leg, and another. Before it was carrying, I did a tradition before. We'd carry about a quarter of a mile away from camp, and a lot of time when we during the late season, that man's lying. And we'd take these dead
soldiers or whatever batch she was in months, and we get our hands and rainy mud, would make just a hole in the ground there, just spread mud, and we drop it in there and just shove mud over it.
So it was kind of a shallow. Those were shallow.
Oh, there wasn't any. It wasn't a rave at all. We just shoved wet mud over it like that.
What about their personal belongings?
Well,
the
if
Japanese
they had a
the
tag,
dog tag.
you had dog tag, we would stick a piece of wood in the ground, make a little cross, and then we put the dog flag on that little in front of running down. And every time they died, so you'd have to go to bury them there every day. And we were so, and the people that were carried, and the barely there were just as weak, and some of them were buried the same way, So it was horrible there, dying, but
Did you get any meals? Because
no
food.
I never ate.
So what did you?
Well, I had, by the grace of God, like I said before, God was taking care of me. I always had something to eat. I remember I had something to eat in my hand. And I would always take a little bite of whatever I had in my hand. And it reminds me of the story in the Old Testament of Elijah. God provided, and birds would bring food to him. And that's never. And always has, by the grace of God, always have. I always had something to eat, but it wasn't much, but it was to keep me alive.
Tell me about the different things that you survived on. The different foods that you found.
Well, we survived when we ever was on a detail or work detail. The first thing we did, if we was out in the open, the woods or some field, first thing we did was find out what was good to eat. If you ever wondered how some people know what's good to eat, what's not, in the wild, it's because they have eaten or they died because they eat this. In other words, you already know, don't touch that because so-and-so ate that, So that's the way we learned. We had to learn what was good to eat for that because the people would get sick. I bet in Formosa, when I was there, we went on a detail one time, and we was always looking for something to eat, and we ran upon a bush that had some seeds. It looked like cockleberry. I forget the name of the plants. But anyway, we took these seeds and we opened them up, and we tasted them. I had to taste a little bit to eat, and they tasted good, like a pencil bee. It looked like a pencil bee, and it tasted good. So we started eating. Hey, this is good. Well, castor bee. That's what it was. A castor bee plant. And so we started getting sick. I think one person that we came back to camp, we showed this bead to one of the fellows. He was a farm boy, and he knew, where'd you get this? Or why they be out there? He said, that's a castor bee. They kill horses back home. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I don't know what, but we got very sick from eating those bees. And that's the way we found out what was good to eat, boy, or not. Somebody either died or got sick. So we learned what was good edible plants and things like that, what we had to eat. Test everything out, somebody paid the price, And if you wonder, other time you have on TV way out in the jungle, some people eating things, you wonder how they know what plants are good. Well, because of somebody got sick and they didn't take them anymore or whatever, or they got better, that's where they are. And we had to learn the same process. That's pretty.
About how long were you at Camp O'Donnell? Or where did you go?
I was there a very short time. You see, when we arrived at O'Donnell, the Japanese needed uh, to use whatever war material that we had. So if there were trucks that we destroyed, they wanted to get some of these trucks back into shape. So they would call for men in the camps that to go on these details, especially if you were a mechanic, they would call them mechanics. And they would take these men on details and go right back to the tent, and have them work on these automobiles or whatever it was that they needed to take care of and put back into shape. And others had to go on detail rebuilding bridges. You see, bridges were blown up during the retreat. So the bridges had to be rebuilt. So they would take a lot of prisoners to rebuild it. I was on one of the bridge building details, so we had to go and build bridges again that was destroyed during the war. So they had us busy all over the Philippine Islands. They had prisoners doing different type of jobs, work like that. But they were treated very badly. The workers, the American workers, they were treated very badly by the Japanese. And so that. I left there, went on a bridge building detail, and some of the bridges were remade by Americans and Japanese uh, engineers.
Uh-huh.
Some of them they had to tie some of the prisoners with ropes to let them down the gorges, so they could do the works of pilings and whatever they had to do. So it was really an experience, and being also brutally, all the work was done by Japanese who were brutal. They had no concept of mercy. They had no concept of doing good or rewarding your brand, thing like that. So it was a struggle to be under their.
Describe a day on this bridge detail. What was it like for you? What time did you start? How long did you have to work? Exactly how did they treat you while you were working?
Well, the worst treatment was not on the bridge building details because it was work that had to be done, but at the concentration camps where most of the prisoners were at. A great amount of prisoners were in these camps, and that's where you see all the mysteries and the work.
Now, how did they separate? Who went on work detail and who went to the camps?
Well, they would just choose. They would ask people who knew something about the work, and then they didn't have enough. They would just kick you out and have you go in work. And even if you didn't know anything about it, because they could always use you for something, whenever you're gonna after work.
And the people who were at the prison camps then weren't doing
Well, at the beginning, no, they were at the beginning of the prison 10 years. They they started to work at the places where they were incarcerated in camps, way out into the open land. There wasn't in towns or that. And they started farming, but everything was done by hand. There was no equipment, no tools, no farming equipment. You went into a land. You had to cut down all the trees by hand, remove all the bushes and the ant hills. You had to fight all the snakes and all of that. It was wild stuff. But you,
Were there many poisonous snakes?
oh yeah, there was a in jungle, but with that we killed a python on this big snakes. It was in the jungle, and you had to live there with all the animals. Of course, we had a non-power, so we shot them up big. I said, yeah, this word about being bitten or anything. We just shot and killed them. He had some machines that we would talk. Get rid of them real fast. Right? But in these camps, the main camp, Cabanatuan, was later moved. They moved from back down to Cabanatuan. They built another camp, which would be more or less the main camp where they held all the prisoners. And in that camp was an awful place to be in. There was no sanitary facilities. If you dug a hole and you did your number two with boards there on the hole, a lot of them were so weak they would fall into these holes. Well, your number two was in there, and it was all so weak. Some with malaria. You had malaria, you're walking in a daze, and when somebody died next to you, if he was in one of these ducks, he was glad because they gave you more room. So it was all so proud, mushed up, and when somebody died, oh man, you got more room now. He wasn't thinking so much about, oh, I'm sorry he died. Well, that's what's not in your thought. You're trying to survive, and you're not thinking about being too versatile or hey, it was worse on these ships at sea when you use the ships at sea. But on the ground there, it was see the personnel there where they had malaria, they had yellow job back, your skin turns yellow, and you had very where your jars swell, your body swell, your face swell, yeah. If it's so swelling, your eyes closed, you can't see. Your body is all very, and all of the diseases be improved because of lack of vitamins. Yeah, and the food in America, you tamed them all, and all these diseases, no way to fight it, no medicine to hear that. And by the grace of God, I always never felt good. I didn't have any coughing, just a little touch of malaria one time, but that was it.
About how many men do you say were at this cabana swarm?
Oh, there was thousands, maybe 10 or 11,000. I'm not too sure, but
And about how long were you all there?
well, it depended because details would go out from that time. You would stay there about through, then they'd ask for certain detail to go to a certain province to do certain things. So they would call something an event. But then they also had a place. We called it the hospital, but it wasn't a hospital. There was no medical supplies or anything. We just called it the hospital. Where most of the men who were really sick, and in fact, they were so sick they were mentally out of their minds. And I volunteered to go there and be a guard, which meant, I would make sure that they didn't escape out of a bond. A lot of them, they were mentally incapable of having right decisions. A lot of them would go and try to escape underneath the wire, and then Japanese guards were out there and surrounding the cabin, and they would get in trouble. They would be shot if they was caught trying to escape. So it was our duty as guards to keep them leaving our own barbed wire time, but we were with them, so they wouldn't escape and get shot or get killed.
So you served as a guard for a while?
Yeah, for the most for the person that was just mentally just gone, just ready to die, you know, and we couldn't kill them or anything like that. But we just had to wait till they died, and so they would sometimes do and act and things that were, you know, not too what true right, you know, and in the eyes. So we had to watch them. So, in fact, a friend of mine from Austin, Texas, Royal Reese, and I were together as guards at that particular camp. This Royal Reese went to the Methodist church where Adam and his family and I uh, were well known among ourselves.
And what was his name again?
Joel Reese, Joel Ruiz, and he covered the Reese side, and we were there over there together, and these camps needed food, so they started farms out there. So they, like I said before, they had to start digging just plain dirt and start trying to make a farm out of a jungle, and it was very difficult, very difficult. But the Japanese guards would force you to labor, and they were more harassment than trying to get the work done. They would beat you for no personal, no reason at all. You would do a certain work, and they would come by and they would hit you. You didn't know why they hit you. They would babble in Japanese, or you wanted to say, "Well, what does he want me to do?" So you would dig here, or you turn this rock here, or just you look at it. Is this what you wanted? You know, and they would hit you, and they would, you know, really beat you up just because they didn't approve of what you did, you know, but you didn't know what he wanted. So it was a harassment.
What was the worst beating that you received, or the worst
Well,
treatment?
Yeah,
Well, not so.
I was they had a roll call and Camp Murphy, I'm not a campground. They had a roll call, and I was one of the last ones to come to the roll call at night. It was three of us, and the Japanese came in, and he saw us straggling in to go to the line. He hollered something Japanese. Hayaku means hurry up. So we kind of take our time. They didn't really impress him, you know, as far as rushing out there like the other did. So he got his rifle and he struck at it. Well, he butted it around. Well, he missed it. Somebody jumped out of the way. And that upset him. He got real mad. So we all lined up. He asked for those that had the last TV. And we have a code among us that if anything, anybody did something that was wrong, well, you should speak up and take your punishment. So that the rest of us probably live, because if nobody spoke up, everybody would penalize you. So we three went up there, and he got his bayonet out, and his bayonet has a metal sheath. So if he stood his attention, the person he came, he swung, and he hit one of my friends with a full charge. And then I was in the middle. He hit me. Oh, you know, when he hit me here on the side, I didn't feel it at the moment he hit. It seems that a little afterward is when I felt the blow. And then that's
So were you
something
breathing?
No, it didn't breathe. It didn't knock me down. But the other fella, it knocked him down, you know. And you see, in Japanese army, you're not supposed to fall down. I don't care what they do to you, you're not supposed to fall down. So that enraged the Japanese. It enraged them so much. And finally, after everybody was sent back into the barracks, and it was at night, everybody sent back, they took us three and in front of the guardhouse. And in front of the guardhouse, they made us kneel. See, the Japanese were always on guard. You sit in the chairs, all through their guard duty. In America, it's 2 hours long. 2 hours long, you can go to your bunk or whatever and come back on guard. But Japanese, they're on guard. They're all the chairs, they're all sitting there on guard. They get up, go do their guard duty, come back, and then sit down again. And so there was a whole row of Japanese guards sitting there. And they made us kneel. And they went and got a big branch of a tree, they cut it, and they put it in the tree here, underneath here. Made us kneel like this on the ground. And while we were down on our knees like that, they would come and jump and fall on our knees here. Well, to make it, really feel you, it hurt, So they would jump on it all night long. They would come, guards would get up and run, and jump on our thighs here, to put pressure on that big branch that was on. And it was kneeling. So they was there all night long doing that. And one of my fellows there, one of the fellows started crying. I could hear him sobbing, while we were beating his feet. And somehow or another, I told him, don't cry. Don't show them, that she's crying. Because it would be worse enough, but because the ends of their code, you're not supposed to cry. You're supposed to sit there and take all the punishment. And they beat up on their own people too. They weren't just a cost. So we stayed there all night long, something like that. Finally, in the morning, as the guys were going back to work, you could see them across the road. They was all getting ready to go to work the next day. And I assumed that they thought we had to go to work. But they let us go. But we went. That around lot. And thank God they didn't execute anything.
Yes, thank God.
But there were so many things that happened in prison camp where other prisoners they stole things and all, and Japanese was catching hiding things, and they were punished too in different ways. Some would hang them. They hang them up by the bum and all, and Osaka, Japan, and some of them had a can of water on their head. They had a whole can of water on their head, sand they did. And after a while, that get with head. But then they could see that he couldn't weaken her. And they did so many different types of punishes. And they laughed at it. They thought it was funny. And it was every day somebody received this type of punishment and all. And of course, we tried our best also in altering whatever we could do in order to help ourselves to go through all of this suffering too. We had our own intelligence, but we had tried to find out all about the Japanese, all about their who they were to punish. We had people that learned Japanese while being up there just too, and they didn't let on that they knew Japanese. So when they would hear some Japanese say something, say, "What you want to do?" did notify the prisoner, hey, where he's Japan do this and
Prepare yourself. So we learned because we had to learn how to survive. In fact, we knew where all the Japanese bars lived. We knew who was on bar. We knew
this type of behavior, you know. In fact, when we come from work camps, and we'd see the place where we were staying, a window half open or fully open. We knew what Japanese was on guard. You know, we had our own intelligence set up too, where we weren't just a bunch of ignorant people out there taking all the beating. You know, we developed a strategy of our own for our own good and for our own protection too. Oh yeah, we hid a lot of things. We learned how to steal, you know, not because we were thieves, but to survive, you know. We hid, we stole food, we would hide it under different forts. You know, the Japanese didn't know of a lot of things that we done, but we've done it all, you know, in our to survive. Of course, once our captivity was over, we didn't go much getting in the wall, but it didn't get a matter of survival for us. We had our own code, we had our own things that we developed for our own protection, for our own. Yeah, and then we did our own punishment to one of our own that didn't that messed up or did borrow flu or he would steal from our own. So you would you know there was a lot of incidents where our own men would steal medicines, you know, things like that. That you know, whenever we got a hold of anything like that, you know, there was a lot of incidents where a lot of the prisoners were hated by our own prisoners because of their cooperation with the Japanese. So it was a experience that helped me too when I came back home. I wasn't frightened by anything anymore. Nothing caught me by surprise. I knew how less things that would bother the people, it didn't bother me because of what I had gone through before. And I knew the end result of what going through certain experiences would, you know, result in. So it made me well rounded, you know, when I came back.
What you mentioned the stealing, that the men would be stealing, and some of them were stealing from law.
Oh yes.
So that implies some of them were stealing food from the Japanese.
Oh, there was all kind of chicanery going on. There was a lot of prisoners that would find some Japanese school also was a thief himself, you know, even in the army. And they would make deals among themselves. They would trade items themselves. And he would take each items and sell them to the prisoners, you know, for no profit, for no personal gain. You know.
Yes.
And things like that would go on. A lot of that would go on. But the majority of the prisoners were well-rounded, you know. They respected one another, but there were a lot of, I would say, ungodly things happening among prisoners that they were not concerned with the welfare of the rest. They were concerned with their own selves only. And a lot of them became traders too. They became Italian was the Japanese and Arthur turned in the Americans. Or, you know, I did something that, you know, wrong, you know, I said but something that is had and you know. And there was a lot of that going on too. But mostly the well respected prisoners, they knew what was going on. And we dealt with those type of people too. We put them through our own trials. We would bunch on them, and I had an answer for what his actions were. You know. Of course, a lot of other stuff and all we didn't know about. There was fights among the prisoners too. Marky whooping at the Japanese when one person was mad at another person, and they would fight each other, but we wouldn't let the Japanese see them fighting. You know, things like that happened too.
You had mentioned in your testimony about one camp where you were treated a little bit better.
There were some camps
where yes, there were Japanese who were not as brilliant, who came from a different background than other Japanese. You see, some of the Japanese were Japanese that fought in Manchuria,
Yes.
And they were mean, They had no mercy at all. They didn't know what mercy was. It was brutal, and there were other Japanese. In fact, I met some Japanese that when the war started, they came from Brazil, some southern South America. See, there's Japanese in some of the South American countries. So when the war started, they went to Japan to fight to Japan for the country. So I met a lot of those Japanese that were now soldiers, and I could speak Spanish with it because some of South America speak Spanish. So I could speak funny, And I would talk to him. Why are you like this? He says, I don't want to do all this, see, but I can't help. I can't do anything. Because if that guy to be nice to you guys, he's mean guy, he'd be on me. Some will really work the other. And Japanese army was so much different. Right? They would beat their own men up. See, a sergeant would beat up a private, knock him to the ground, everything. He had to stand up at attention and and you accept whatever punishment, and all non-cop or somebody was above me. So we had to deal with that. They treated us the same way.
At what point did you go to Japan?
Well, as the Americans were getting closer and closer during the war, the island after island, finally they were approaching the Philippine Islands. The Japanese decided to pull out all the prisoners out of the Philippine Islands where we were at. In fact, they also had British, there was Java and all the islands out there in Singapore that they captured. There were not English soldiers there. So they had a lot of ships, and they were sending a lot of those to Japan up north, some to Manchuria, some to Korea, some to Formosa. They was putting all of these prisoners putting them on ships and sending them north as the Americans were approaching. During the war. And when the Americans were getting closer and closer to the Philippine Islands, they put a lot of the Americans that were in the Philippine Islands, put them on ships.
So was this in 1945?
This is 1944.
44.
And there were some ships in there earlier in 43. And but in September of 44, I was shipped out. And when they shipped us out, they brought all of the prisoners to Manila. But that's where the ships were. So that's where I met my friend, the Voss Detective Joel Reese there in Bilibid. And his mother somehow had sent him some extra food, to package. And he shared some of that food with me. And that was great. He also gave me a little New Testament that he had from home, and which I would read, you get encouragement from the Word of God. And I left 2 weeks before, I got on board this ship. But as I was walking on the dock, there was 4 abreast, all getting ready to board this freight ship. As I was getting on board, I looked, the dock, cement was down here, and it's way down with the water. The dock was up here, all cement, and the ship was next to the dock. I looked down, there was a little can, an empty can, like a little gallon can, a little half-gallon can. It was made by a prison. Prison was made all of the thing. We had to make our own prison, everything. And it was there, and it was empty. It was sitting on the edge of the dock. So many had passed by, and it was killed there. And when I was walking by and I saw this little can on the edge of the dock. A voice inside said, "Pick it up." I know about you, Bill. Pick it up. Let's see who's talking to me, you know. Nobody was talking to me. So I just answered, you know, I obeyed the voice. Pick it up. So I went, I picked it up, and I took it aboard when he put her down into the ship. I didn't, you didn't designate where you was going to be. They put you down an 18-foot ladder, and they just shoved humanity down into this ship. I just happened to sit down or not sit down. It was so crowded. Oh, so many were down there in the ship. You were just bunched up together for you could barely move. And the one was here, another was here. You was up, your knees were up like this. You couldn't stretch out of nothing. Another fellow was here. It was tight, like a can of sardines. And I was there in my little tent, you know, and they were shouting and hollering. You know, some fellow would move too much, and the guy said, move over, don't hit me. Oh, it was just awful down there. Everybody shouting, hollering, and it was a new experience for us to be down that ship so crowded like that, and everybody hollering, and 104, 5 degrees down in the ship. It was September. And I was there on my little can, you know. Whenever we was on the ship, we stayed there quite a few days before we took off. Whenever it rained above, they also had, you know, on the airfield, they had like a wind deal. I don't know, a long time ago. I don't know, you was probably too young. At the airfield, airports, planes coming in, a lot of times in these country airports, they would have a little, like a funnel to air to let them know which way the air is coming from, the wind, see. Well, they had one of those up there above the ship that would come down into the hold of the ship to bring air down into the bottom of the ship there. Well, it so happened that where I was at, you know, I didn't select the place, it just happened to look above, and where the tail end of that canvas wind ball, okay, was right above my head. So as I was there, and during the shift and the days I was there, whenever it rained, you know, above, the rain would hit inside that little bubble there, that canvas bubble, and the water would come down into there, and as the water came down, naturally it would drip down water. I would catch the water. It was coming through there. And as I was catching the water, I would have that much in my can. That little can, if I picked that, they told me to pick it up, you know, I had the water there. Well, we got fed about once or twice a day. I don't remember too much. And it was just a little rice like this, you know, and we would pass a water bucket around, just a little water, a little rice, you know, enough to, I guess, keep us alive as we should eat. But I would take some of this water and trade it for a little rice from my neighbor where, you know, they was thirsty. I gave him a little water. Maybe a little rice, you know. Your rice, your flesh. He'd give me a little rice, you know. In those days, you would count grains. You wouldn't get a small for a ride like that. Rice and food was so precious down there that you go and you'd break off a few kernels, you know, and you trade it. I gave him a little water. So that kept me, you know, that provided for children, wherever they are. And
Was that the first food you were given? Them rice?
they on board ship, yeah, I learned about that place. Do you have rice and water?
But I mean, in the camps, you had talked about having to forage for your food. Did they ever give you any food?
Not none of the extra. No,
No,
no.
it
It
was
was
the
just
same.
rice. It was just rice.
They would get
Just rice. That was it. We had to get your own water. There was water was available. That's there was nothing extra. The rice.
How many days did it take? How long did it take?
We
to
were
get
aboard that
everything
ship 38 days.
cramped in like that at
Yeah.
boot?
And we buried at sea. Just tossed them overboard when they died.
And
No, you didn't have
about how many dies?
about 38
38.
on that trip. That was 38 days. One died, and they would go crazy. They would go crazy.
Mhm.
The human spirit is different. Some people give up. Some people don't like the experience. They're 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 bringing up in their home, their lifestyle doesn't permit them to go through any kind of hardships, and they don't have the faith and trust in the God. They they trust themselves, and their trust doesn't match very long, and then go crazy. They're desperate, and it is awful. Depending upon the person who's bringing up had a lot to do. There was a lot of the persons there that were very capable of surviving too. It's minor, but there were some that were so weak,
Yes.
mentally, spiritually, and they couldn't take that. They couldn't take.
Let me be sure I understood you. About 38 people died, and the journey took 38 days?
About around 38 days.
38 days.
We landed in. We had to dodge American submarines. See, a lot of these ships with American prisoners were sunk. Thousands died at sea after 2.5 years. That prisoners, they died at sea. Ship was sunk by American submarines. And so we landed in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, when we was there, we stayed there a few days. American English planes came over to straight the Hong Kong area there, in the Bay there. And it so happened that you had to get in line in order to do number one and number two, Yeah. And you wanted to go outside. And of course they had buckets. There was a haul bucket down. They used to do your whatever you had to do something. But these buckets were always full. And you wanted to go outside. They had two boards off of the ship and a water below, of course. And that's where you do your number one. And well, I was in Hong Kong. It just so happened you have to stand in line. There's an 18-foot ladder to the opening above, where the hold of the ship.
Mhm.
Where you had to stand there, and next guy would go out. You go up with a scale on the ladder, and you stand there a long time, holding on to the ladder, and it's your turn to go out to help. But then the line was always full. The ladder was always full. There was never, you always had pulled on. Some of the guys were weak, and they couldn't move themselves up. And they would fall down. And a lot of these buckets that had number two, they had to empty them. They would pull them up out of the hole. And a lot of times, these buckets would fall, and they will splatter all the number two all over the dad down there. And then they was cursing their I know you know this on me. Oh, that was going on day and night all the time. For 48 days you had to stand. Guys yelling, they would go crazy. Some of them, let's go crazy. They start hollering, yelling, just like they're lost. They don't know. Now they're buying mentally, and guys would just go into a consciousness. They would go unconscious.
And back when I talked to you,
The humanist countries, I don't know how long. Anyways, the time I went, I had still the ladder. Finally, I got to go out, and it was in Hong Kong where when I got out, oh, it's so good to smell, even though it's sea air, fresh air. Where you get down to that whole ship, to the smell down there, the tightness, and the yelling and the howling day and night, and never stay. Then you get out there and that sea breeze is. Oh, it's the most wonderful to feel the cool, fresh air hit you after being down days down into the hold of the ship. Then, and while I was on the board there doing my number 2, I tried to stay there long, like to enjoy it, before being going down again. Of course, it would be hard. Hey, hurry up. You did that too long. It's done. Come on, we gotta go. No, we had to go through all of that. And I was there sitting on there, British planes straight Hong Kong harbor. They came. There was kind of, flying my feet up at the bay. The Japanese ships over there in the bay, and I had to get out of there. There's a hold of a ship, not a pulpit, a square. It has, I don't know what you call it, an iron, it's not a fence, but it's the hold of the ship has a iron deal on the hold of the ship. I got up next to that, where all that sparring was going on. Finally, it was over, and I had to go down again to that. They call them the hell ships, and that means that what they was down in there. And but God was good to me. Which they became a helper, became a drop, became a modest, other modern European. And other sons, people praying for me. I was always, like I said, I seem to read the other crazy time where I didn't get the suffering, the other sufferer who had no baby. And then they was there, and they had to suffer whatever. They had to suffer with that in the report of any of the sort. God, I met the road to San Francisco, and I know. I wanted to happen when you visited me. I wanted to go straight. I didn't care for earthly things or nothing. Yeah, I wanted to be with you. But I stayed there in Wool's traveling about the storms. But there is a dog. There is a Jesus Christ. He did come to be saved. He did that for us. God does love us. And but that's the way it is, And anyways,
When you arrived in Japan, uh, were you treated any differently there than you had been in Philippines?
well, it was a little better. It was a little better because in Japan they had more food there in Japan itself. In the Philippine Islands, you had to struggle to get food. In Japan, they seem to have enough rice for their own men, soldiers and civilian population. So we got hold of a little bit more food there in Japan, but we still had to struggle. We still had to hide food, in order to. We still had to survive, under certain uh, Japanese personnel that were so mean and rough with us. We had to develop our own, like I say, intelligence to survive. You don't just go out there and let yourself be manhandled. You do what you can because you wasn't thinking so much of coming back home, you know, as a parasite, like you were in that other days you had to live in a survival life. You wasn't thinking about you were trying to survive every day, every moment, every work detail has its own interests and stays happening. But sometimes you met uh, some Japanese that were indecent. I remember one time we were working in Osaka, in Japan. We were working in warehouses, which was good because we had access to steady food. You know, we had to work with rice, oat, and soybeans and things like that. You know, we had to carry on that, load certain trucks and things. You know, so we had access. You know, because we had to steal it. And one time we was at a warehouse and we came upon some corn. Well, our cook there, when we went to work each year, we always kept cooked our food while we were working. And of course, we had floorboards there. We had stolen food, corn, rice, bowl was underneath the floorboards. So they would only give us certain rations, so from the street. But we would hide his food, so when our cooks made food, he would always steal and add a little more to our food than the usual amount. And that day we got a hold of some corn, and the cook made some popcorn. To heat up corn, you know, it'll pop. Yes, it's like corn. And so everybody, see, in those days we would sneak in food to our camp. We'd make little sacks. You know, I don't know if you remember boulder sacks, cigarette, you know, tobacco. They would make little sack. You remember a boulder sack? Recorder? A boulder sack. Anyway, we'd make little sacks with little strings, you know. So we'd put food, any kind of contraband, and we'd tie it underneath the arms, the strings, little bag. So when they're walking the Japanese could search us, they would hide it under a cross too, those bags and things like that. And one day we came from this work place, and we was loaded. Everybody had little sacks of a little something. It wasn't much, but it was enough for us because little helps if you don't have anything. So everybody was loaded, and they lined us up to go back home. And all of a sudden, a Japanese officer came to inspect the American food bag. And so, of course, our Japanese military personnel that took us to work all the time, he ordered us to stand attention, you know. And then he knew that we was carrying all this stuff. These Japanese personnel knew that we were stealing this and taking it, but he didn't care, you know. He knew it wasn't a great amount, you know. So he knew that this Japanese officer that came upon it was going to find out something, you know. Yes. So he marched us around the building, told us to stay there while he picked out a certain prisoner and for the officer to inspect. And the reason he marches around is so that we could get milk water to return. You know, he would let this man be punished for carrying that contraband, but he wanted us to get rid of all that stuff. We would be. So we was around here. When we got around here, you know, we started jerking this out. You know, it was in like a little alley, and there were Japanese houses on each side of an alley. and they all had tin roofs, every house. So we didn't want to get caught. So we Jersey. So what we gonna do with this? So we just slung it, out there where the houses were. And all of a sudden everybody was doing the same thing. So you could hear the timbers, bing, bang, bang, bang. And then some of them would sling them, and there was electric wires above our heads in the alley, And some of these little bags got up there and they twirled up, and all of a sudden we'd be at attention, hear a couple little bags, they fall off the wire, zoom, and they have to pick it up and throw it again, and it was really bad, flying all over the place, and we finally got leave everything on.
What happened to the men who were caught stealing?
They are punished, slapped around, knocked them out. They didn't shoot him or kill him, nothing like that. But he received. But we had a more or less a code that if anybody did anything wrong, rather than the whole bunch, he punished that person, takes their whatever, punish for me.
You were in Japan for a year. When did you hear that the war had ended? And what happened after Hiroshima and Nagasaki when word occurred that the war had ended and Japan had finally surrendered?
Well, after I left Kobe, Osaka, I went to a little town, Maibara, Maigara, and we were draining a lake. We were draining a lake for them to have more farmland to plant. And as we was there at this particular place, we would see the B-29 bombers fly over our head, and we could hear sometimes the explosions, they got the bomb. But it's funny, and now that I think about it, but when the bomber would fly over, what was in my thought? I would say, oh, I'm going to shoot, grab some food or something, something that would satisfy our hunger rather than bomb me, That was our thoughts at the time. Being so hungry like that. But anyway, camp. This is the way the war ended for us. We were there in that camp in Maibara. There was a wall about 10 foot high surrounding our camp. The guards on the outside of the wall. And the Japanese commander told us that you didn't have to go to work that day. It puzzled us. See, we didn't know anything about the war, where the Americans were, anything about who, the war that was going on. We didn't know. We was there, and I still was like a loner among the prisoners. I was the artist of the camp too. In fact, in order for me to get more food, I would draw portraits. The men. Sometimes they would have a picture of the girlfriend. I would draw a portrait of the girlfriend. And I would get a little food from them, They would give me a little extra food, Give me a little extra rice, a few more grains, or something. But that's what I did, for extra food. And so one day, they told us we didn't have to go to work. I was out there in the yard, in the prison yard, by myself. And I was out there standing like Napoleon, a picture of Napoleon, But I was there just staring, and then all of a sudden, see, I did commercial artwork before I went into the service. So that when I looked in the sky, I saw some clouds in the sky that were unusual to me. See, I knew different types of clouds, you know, when I had to draw pictures, the different types of clouds, you know. But then I looked at these clouds, I said to myself, I've never seen these type of clouds. Because these clouds were about 35,000 feet up high, and it was late afternoon, and sometimes in the late afternoon, the sun is setting, the clouds have a pink color on them. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
They're pinkish. Well, I looked up there, and these clouds were pinkish, and they were different because they were clouds like rolling in and out of each other. You know, I said, clouds don't, they go, they move. In stormy weather, you can see them moving fast, you know. But these clouds were different because they were like balls going in and out of each other. Way up 35,000 feet in the air. These clouds were going in and out of each other. It puzzled me. I said, I've never seen clouds like this before. And so one day after that, the railroad passed through our camp, outside of our camp. There was a railroad. And on one of these railroads, we could look to the cracks of our walls and see the railroad trains as they would go by. You know, we looked to the slots in between the boards, and we could see that there were railroad cars with tanks, Japanese tanks. And then we could see civilians that were boarding these trains, piling on the tank and all that. And it also puzzled me. I said, no. I said, on military trains, civilians do not board military trains. It puzzled me again, you know. And then there's a station that was real close to the camp. And we had been to this station because on one occasion we had to tear down a Japanese house that was near the station. And there was a man, a white person, who was dressed in khaki that was coming down the street. He had just got off the train. And by that time, we was already on top of the roof of the houses where we were housed. You know, we had the freedom now. Not only could we not have to go to work, we would even get up there on top of the house, the places where we stayed to sleep and all that. You could look out in the yard and see the tracks, the trains and stuff. And we saw this person coming down, dressed in khaki. And we all looked, and the fellows that were on top said, hey, there's a person coming down the track dressed in khaki. He's not a Japanese, he's a white person. Yeah? And so they would tell us he was coming down the road. Where's he now? He's coming down the road. It was strange because everything was Japanese.
Yes.
Everybody that was all Japanese. Then to see a strange person, a white person dressed in khaki, walking down the road caught our attention. Where's he now? He's coming down the road. And finally he came to the road that led to our camp. He made a left turn, came, and where's he now? And he must be at the door now, you know. Of course, the Japanese were still on guard. They're still there on guard. And the guardhouse was full of Japanese guards, like they always were. On guard, you know, sitting down, waiting to make their turns at guard duty. And the door starts shaking. The front door starts shaking. And we could see the Japanese soldier kind of look, see who he was, you know. And everybody's attention. There was about 300 of us there at that camp in Maibara, Japan, next to Lake Biwa, one of the largest lakes there in Japan, and we could see the Japanese guard was uneasy. Finally, somehow or another, the door was open and this person dressed in khaki, he was a white person, he come into the door and he put his hand on his hips. See, by that time we had made like a semicircle as he was going into the door. He said, "Who is this person? Why is he here?" And all, he puzzled us. We didn't know. We didn't know the war was over. He stood there, the Japanese were right there on guard duty, sitting as always. He looked at us. He says, "Hey, don't you guys know that the war is over?" What? We didn't even know that the Japanese had surrendered there on the Missouri, where.
And you haven't heard
Fargo-
about the bombings of Pearl Harbor and
all I know is that a big bomb and the clouds of a
so you saw
it
some
was a
shots.
Nagasaki bomb. It wasn't the Hiroshima bomb. It was a Nagasaki bomb. The came over our camp, but I didn't know it was a atomic bomb. I just saw the clouds. I knew they were different from everything. And he said, "Didn't you know Japan surrendered?" What? Yeah, they dropped two bombs. They dropped the last bomb, Nagasaki bomb. They dropped on Japan, and that's what made them surrender. Then I remember, I saw then right afterward, and so we said to ourselves, I assume everybody thought the same thing. Well, if Japan surrendered and the war is over, I said, why are the guards still on duty, like always? And everybody turned towards the guards. So everybody decided in one mind, one thought, let's go check it out, see if it's true. So everybody started marching towards the guardhouse. We'd see their reaction. If it was true the war was over, we'd expect something to happen. And then some of the fellows went, see the Japanese guard, they stacked their rifles in front of the guardhouse, see, and while they were sitting on the chairs. But Robbie stacked there in the front. Some went walking towards the rifles, others went walking towards the Japanese guard. And we could see the guards while they were sitting there and watching what was going on, like, there was, what the thought, I assumed they said, well, what are we going to do now, Our captain hadn't said what to do, and nothing. We caught them in a situation where they were completely without orders, So I assume they ran off towards their rifles. See, well, our guys ran for the rifles too. So there was a tug of war for the rifles, We believed that guy said the war was over. So the Japanese grabbed the rifles and the Americans, and we had some British and Australians there also. There was a tug of war for the rifle. Everybody's fighting for the rifle. Finally, the Japanese, I assume they figured that, we're not going to win this thing, So they turned loose of the rifles and they split. All of them took off. They went, everyone. And our interpreter, we had, whenever we was in a camp, prison camp, the Japanese always had an interpreter, to make sure that all the orders were carried out and that we knew and understood, So I looked over and I saw the interpreter over there. He was kind of the background, kind of looking like, like, what am I going to do? This is a situation I'm not prepared for, More or less that was his thought, because I could see him backing up, like he was going to take off, And I saw him, he was slipping out. And I told two of the fellas, I said, look at the interpreter, You could see him, he was trying to sneak out. And I said, let's go get him, We had no thoughts of injuring him, killing him or nothing like that. Not like the Japanese. I said, let's get him. Let's give him a good scare. So we started walking towards him. He finally spotted us walking towards him, and he speeded up and he went opened through a back door where guards used to use, and he started walking real fast, to get away from the camp. And we started walking after him pretty fast too. It's just myself and two other guys. Finally, he started kind of halfway running, and we started running after him. And then he took off, and then we took off after him. And we got some rocks that were on the road there, and started throwing them at him, throwing at him, boy, he took off. We just stood there laughing at him. We weren't going to hurt him. We were so happy to be free. We didn't care to hurt him. We just wanted to give him a big scare. So he took off. Oh, then the guards took off. They're supposed to kill themselves. They don't surrender.
Yes.
But not these guards. Forget Larry Carey. Kali Kali. Forget Kali Kali. They took off, man. And so the Japanese, some of the men that worked us at this hard work, they, I guess they felt, I don't know what they felt, but here they come with a little box of rice, already cooked, to present it to us as a token of, I treated you brutally mean, but here's a little box of rice. I'm giving you, maybe this will make up, We could care less, because the fellows took off when we found out the Japan surrendered, we took off for the countryside, all the houses. We confiscated whatever food we could find. On the farms, we get all the vegetables or anything, and they come back. The fellows come back, and what little kitchen we had, they would throw all the vegetables there, so they could start eating good, And I remember the Japanese brought the guys after a day or two. See, we stayed there 2 weeks before the Americans ever came, and we got out of there. They brought some beer and then bottles of beer. It was hot,
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't drink beer. But it was such a joyous occasion. We were free, oh boy, that I opened a bottle, and woo, all for tasting. I never drank it in the first place, but just at the moment, and I never touched it no more. Never have. But they brought us some bread, but it didn't have no yeast in it.
Uh-huh.
It was just a big, heavy dough of bread. Yeast, how it makes a difference. Said they built us some showers there at the camp.
So that was
But,
after, though.
Yeah, after they surrendered everything, civilians came in and they built us some showers, and they tried to accommodate it the best they could,
How were the buildings? We didn't really talk about this last camp.
Well,
what were the
this
buildings
last
like?
camp-
How were you sleeping in there?
Well, we slept on the floor,
Uh-huh.
on the wooden floors, and this last camp, since it was in Japan, it wasn't like the other camps in the other islands. This was Japan, and they made structures that were a lot stronger, a lot better than that one Japan out there in the different islands that we were in. And we slept on the floor with mats, just get a mat, sleep on the floor. We got used to sleeping just on the floor like that.
And still very crowded?
No, not there. No, it wasn't as crowded there anymore at those camps.
But you didn't have any showers until after.
Oh, after it. And we used Japanese uniform, most of the guys, because our clothes had worn out through the years. And in the Philippine Islands, we didn't have any clothes at all. We worked in G-strings, just a piece of cloth here in the front, to guard yourself there, and that was all. We had a jacket; it was all torn and beat up, and since it was hot tropical, in the tropics, we'd have to march in the streets. The civilians would see us were marching, and sometimes they could see all of our bodies, but that's the way we worked in the Philippine Islands. But in Japan, when we got there, they gave us used Japanese uniforms, but they were small for small people. So it was very, for a 6 foot tall person to put on a Japanese uniform, it was kind of difficult. You would cut off the legs, and they would all do all kinds of things on the uniform to make them fit you. But it was, well, I fit in real good because I wasn't too big a person. So I fit in rather well. But we didn't get to wash our clothes. There was no place to wash them.
So you never could wash them?
No, there was no place to wash them. We could wash our G-strings, maybe. Yeah, wash them, just put them in water and soap it. Rinse them out, hang them up, and dry them that way. But other than that, in the Philippine Islands, it was awful.
How small were you by the time you?
Well, I was about 98 pounds, in captivity.
And how much did you weigh when you went?
About 135 pounds when I was.
So you lost 37 pounds.
Something like that. Yeah. Something like that. But that was a Nagasaki bomb that they dropped. And that's what I even told, when the bomb came over, that was the Japanese guards still on duty there, They hadn't given up that camp yet. And I told him, I told her in Japanese, I don't know. I told her, in Japanese, I told her, beautiful, told her. I forgot the words I used. I share. Which meant, and it was a beautiful, the atomic bomb. If you never knew what it was, and you saw it for the first time, and the sun and clouds were pink, and all the rest, there was no clouds that day other than the bomb coming over. It was a dark bluish sky with these red clouds coming over our camp. And it was a beautiful, in fact, I told the Japanese, such a beautiful sight. The other prisoners, they weren't artists, they didn't care about art, so to them it was just the clouds up there. They didn't pay no attention, but not to me. Oh no, I used to draw clouds. I used to know all about the cloudy, different sheep clouds and cirrus clouds, all those different type of clouds.
Before we break, is there anything else that you want to say about the war and your experiences during the war?
Well, it has to be that what brought me through, what was one of the things that brought me through? The thing that I have said is that prayer, especially from your persons who know you, who know God. Anybody can say, God help me, but you have to have a relationship with God to know Him. Once you know Jesus, And if you know Jesus and you know who He is and what He can do for you, you have a greater advantage over a person who just depends upon his own initiative, and sometimes his initiative falls short, and sometimes his initiative does go through, but that's because God has something for him later on, Because I met with my friend Joel Reese there, and he was torpedoed by the American submarine on his ship, and he never came back home. He
Mhm.
died at sea.
Mhm.
He died at sea. So uh, I I think that faith in God, faith and trusting that He will uh, be with you, He will help you, and even if you uh, don't make it back, the fact is that if you know Him and He knows you and He has uh, given you uh, uh, made you a new creature in Christ Jesus, as the Bible says. If you know Him, you know where you're going when you die. Because you see, I was not only a soldier in the Philippine Islands in World War II, I also fought in the Korea as an infantryman. And that's where I really met God. And that's where I really uh, uh, received um, my most beautiful experiences in the war, where God would watch over me and take care of me. And not only watch over me in different times. Uh, you see, in World War II, I was married yet. But then when the Korean War came and I went to Korea, I was married with this beautiful lady over there, and I had 2 children.
Uh-huh.
And so in Korea, I wanted to come back home. I didn't want to die out there in that snow in Korea and not come home, and she would be without a husband and my children would be without a father. So I was 32. Is that all right? I just stop now. So,
Maybe that's what we think. We're starting to talk about Korea, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, were you drafted into Korea, or did you?
I was in the reserves when I left in World War II. After the war was over, I stayed in the reserves because if you stayed in the reserves and another war erupted somewhere, I would get to keep the rank that I had. So that's the reason I stayed in the reserve. I didn't want to go into the reserve as a PF private again.
Uh-huh.
At least I had some experiences behind me. At least would be a lot better for me if I kept my rank.
And your rank was?
At the time that I retired, I was just a corporal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And if I was to get into another war, I would keep my rank. But it didn't happen that way. When I went to Korea, they took a rank away from me and made me a PFC, to which I'm still trying to ask the government to restore what they had given me.
And why do you think they did that?
Well, I don't know. That was the reason I stayed in, to keep my rank.
Yes.
But then when I went in, they lowered my rank. I don't know. I guess they had to have so many PFCs in the Army, so many of that, and I just had to go with my rank, I can't understand too much about how the government works as far as the enlisted personnel is concerned, their ranking and all that. I wasn't going to hire a lawyer to try to get anything done. That was out of the question.
Uh-huh.
I just had to obey the orders that were presented to me and told me, and I had to go to Korea. I tried to get out of going to Korea. I had Lyndon Johnson, who was our president of the United States.
Yeah.
At the time, he was a senator.
Uh-huh.
And I appealed to him to get me out of the service. I already married and had 2 children, and I didn't feel that after being in the prisoner of war for so long that I didn't have to go to the war where there were so many other able-bodied people that could go, that were young, a lot younger than myself. But I assumed they needed people over there fast in the Korean War. Since the North Koreans invaded South Korea, they needed a lot of soldiers and people to back up the South Korean army. So I guess they didn't think too much about who they sent over there. And so I had to go. I had a lawyer. Also, I had the minister of the Church of Christ appeal for me, and I had quite a few important people in the state tried to get me out of going to Korea, but it didn't happen.
So, what
And-
were your experiences like when you got in Korea?
Well, when I got in Korea, it was during the winter in Korea, and I had to go over there and fight in that snow and that ice cold Korea. And being a southern boy used to the sun, the cold didn't appeal to me very much. But anyway, I had to go, and I was 32 years old at the time. And the younger men, the younger soldiers, of course, were a lot more ready to walk and do the hiking, do all the soldiering, and I was delayed a little bit because of my age. But at any rate, I was there, and I went up there. But before I went, I'm going to say this. Before I went to Korea, while I was at Camp Stoneman, I was considering about my family, my wife and children. What if I was to go over there and get killed? You know, what hardship would they have to go through? You know, I had just bought a house before I left. You know, my wife was not working at the time, so I felt it was very difficult if I was to be killed there in Korea, and I wanted to get out for that particular purpose. So I appealed, but it didn't work. So I went. But before I went, I said to myself, what if I was to die over there? I wanted to make sure that if I did die, that I would go to be with the Lord. I would go to heaven, as you know. I didn't want to die and go to hell. So I made a commitment to God, and I turned my whole life over to Jesus Christ. I knew who Jesus was because I had gone to church all of my life up until then. I knew who Jesus was. I knew that he came to earth. I knew that he died for all, that we could not save ourselves, that we had to have Jesus as our Lord and as our Savior. So I said, if I was to die, I wanted to make sure that I would be in his hands. I would go, as he said, to heaven to be with him forever and receive eternal life. He promised eternal life. So I made a commitment before I went to Korea at Camp Stoneman in California, and I turned my whole life over to Jesus. I remember that day, that night, as I came out of a theater with that thought in mind: what is going to happen to my family, my wife and children, if I die in Korea? So it was on my mind. So after coming out of the theater, I was, like I say, a loner. I'm always by myself. I was walking down the dark street past all the barracks, and all the men in the barracks were either shooting craps, playing cards. You could hear their cussing and their soldierly talk. And I was outside walking down the street where I could hear all that. And that's when I decided to turn my whole life over to Jesus Christ. And that is exactly what I did. I did that, and I was very happy and content that I did. Therefore, I knew that if I ever was to leave this earth, I would know where I was going since I committed myself, my whole life to Jesus Christ. So when we shipped overseas, I flew over the Pacific, landed in Japan, and from Japan I went on a boat to Korea. At that particular time, all of the North Koreans had pushed all of the South Koreans and the American forces into Busan, which is the southernmost part there in South Korea, and that's where all of the American forces were. They had bottled them there, and when I arrived there, that's when they made the big push to push them all the way back up the country there, all the way up to northern part of Korea. And that's where I arrived, and it was in the winter. It was cold, and the snow was very prevalent there. And I remember that the strategy at the time was the American tanks were on the valleys trying to bring their offensive, but at this time they proceeded to use the mountains because the Chinese were overcoming the Americans, because when the tanks were in the lowlands, they would come on into the mountains where the tanks couldn't go, and they would surround the American forces. But this time, under the general that was commanding, he proceeded to put all the infantry up into the mountains, plus the tanks, which caused us to have a great offensive against the Chinese, and we were not retreating anymore. We were on the offensive. I remember we walked about 25 miles towards the north where the North Korean forces were, and the Chinese also at the time. And as the lieutenant told us that we were to attack the North Koreans and the Chinese. And so we went down the hill to where we heard shots from the enemy, and we were going to attack them. And before we attacked them, I remembered a hymn in our church that we sang, and the name of the hymn was "Onward, Christian Soldiers, Onward as to War, with the cross of Jesus going on before." I was singing that song while we was going down the hill and attacking the Chinese. That was my victory song. I was a Christian, and I was asking myself as I was going in that attack, should I kill the enemy? Should I shoot him? The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." So that was heavily on my mind. And I said, I don't know what the answer is, but I still went down. Suddenly I saw a bush, and I saw a little tree, and it seemed to me that there was a enemy soldier getting ready to fire upon me. As soon as I could, and as quick as I could, I aimed my rifle towards the object that was moving towards me, and it seemed that the rifle was pointing at me, and I fired. When I fired, the gun did not fire at all. It just clicked. In other words, the shell didn't explode. And right away, as soon as I was singing and I turned and shot, that gave me the answer to my prayer. Shall I kill the enemy? Shall I be a killer? And the answer came, although you point and although you fired, the cartridge did not fire. So I held it up in the air. I says, I wonder, if I should kill or not. And that gave me the answer. I shouldn't kill the enemy, I'll be there. I'll lead them in. I'll do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not going to kill. So I said, I want to make sure, so I pulled the trigger to check my gun, and it fired off. I said, well, that's the answer. God doesn't want me to kill, but there is fire. I can kill if I want to, So I decided during the rest of the time that I was in Korea that I would not, I would not kill. I would lead them in. I would be there and everything. And
Had you killed in World War II?
no,
No.
I shot a lot, but I didn't know whether I had killed anybody because in war, it's a lot of people think you see somebody, you shoot them, and they die. No, uh,
Not sure.
there was so much smoke and planes were coming in. I was firing at the planes, but you don't know whether you shot at it because he fed away. All the smoke was there. You didn't know whether he fell down or shot down or whatever. At any rate, I was there, and it told me, in my mind, my heart, not to kill, although I'm there. And so we took the first hill, we took the second hill, we took the third hill, and as we took the last hill, we went over the mountain, and it was nothing but snow, nothing but white snow. And the enemy was up in the mountain, and they started firing at us while we was, and they could see it, they could pick us out like a fly in the milk. It's all snow, no trees or nothing. They could see you, so they started firing. And the bullets started whistling. All the snow was falling in my face as the bullets were coming close to me, and they didn't kill me there. They didn't. No bullets found their mark on me there. And our corporal said, "Hey, look, we shouldn't be here. Let's go back over the mountain where they couldn't see us anymore." So he said, "Well, the squad, certain squad, when we fire towards the hill, y'all jump up and run and get back over there, and the rest of us will be here." And so they did that, and so the next squad, which I was the last squad to leave, I had on my back all of my sack full of socks, underwear, and a lot of toiletries and soap and all the things a soldier carries, And then not only that, my brother, Reuben, who I met in California, he gave me, since I told him I had committed my life to Jesus, to Christ, to God, he gave me a lot of books to read in order to learn more about the Scripture, learn more about the Bible, So I was loaded out with books, plus all of my underwear and other things that soldiers usually carry in that. And I said to myself while I was laying there in the snow, I have to jump up, run, and jump over the mountain. But all of this stuff in my bag, it's going to make me it's so difficult to me get up, and get out of there as fast as I could. So what I did before our corporal gave me the order to leave, I took off my sack, my soldier's sack with all the stuff, and I left it there on the ground. I said, I've got to be real light to get up and run. So I did all of that. Then he gave the order to run, and I jumped up. You know how Bugs Bunny, how they in the movies get out of there? Well, I made a Bugs Bunny there, and I got out and jumped over the mountain where the Chinese that were shooting at us couldn't see us. We made a rendezvous around the mountain to get at them at a different angle rather than straight ahead. And that's where I got wounded there. Our own American planes dropped napalm bombs thinking they was dropping on the enemy, but they dropped them about, I'd say about 8 feet from where they landed where I was at. So that napalm, it's like a jelly. It's on fire, it burns. So all of my legs here started burning because it hit me. It didn't knock me to the ground, although the force was powerful enough, and all my legs started burning. And so I had to sit down to take my boots off because they were burning. But I finally managed to take the boot off, burn all my fingers as I was trying to get my boots off, but a medic came and helped me to go back to my where all the other men were that didn't go into the attack. And so I couldn't walk, so it was all snow. So the medic helped me go back to where the men were, and I was scooting down the mountain sitting on my buttocks, and with my rifle here, scooting down the big snowy mountain way down, to get back. But we had
Yes.
certain hours to get back. And I was scooting down, all the way down. I was tired, and I did this, to rest. And as I did this rest, I looked up, and right in front of me was like my brother there, was a Chinese soldier with an automatic rifle like this, facing me as I head down. As soon as I could, as I was walking down, I got the rifle and aimed at him, and I was getting ready to pull the trigger, and I looked, and he was near a little twig of a tree, and he had a white cloth above, which meant that he was surrendering. I didn't see the cloth. I was getting ready to shoot when I saw the cloth. Oh, he's ready to surrender.
So you didn't have to shoot.
So we disarmed it. We got his rifle, threw it away, got all his ammunition and scattered them out. And since I was so hurt, I wanted to get back, and it was getting dark. So we went back to where we was all the soldiers, our commanders were at, who directed the attack. And then I got back to the hospital in Japan. But before, in all this cold weather, and at my age, I was suffering. It was just too much for an older person. The younger kids were all right, but as an older person, I asked God to take me out of this, Lord. I'm too old to be out here, Lord. That was my prayer. And sure enough, they evacuated me on an airplane back to Japan, and I got into the hospital there, and I stayed, I think, about 2 months in the hospital, recovering from my leg wound there. So the Lord answered my prayer and got me out of that. And what I had to go, I didn't want to go back, all that shooting and killing and all that went on over there. I just hated to go back again. So before I went, I had to go back to Korea. Before I went, my prayer was this: Lord, I don't want to go back to Korea. I don't want to go back and face all the hardships that I faced. I told him I'm too old. I said, but Lord, if it's your will, I'll go. And in my mind, I was saying, I hope it's not his will that I go with. I was saying in my heart, I said, it's just like Jesus said, not my will, but thine be done, Jesus said, when it came to him to be going to the cross. So I read the Bible, and I knew that scripture. And I said, Lord, if it be your will, I don't want to go back to Korea. But if it's your will, I'll go. And I thought maybe he said, oh, okay, you can stay. You don't have to go. No, I had to go. They put me on a ship, sent me back to Korea. And that is where I had most rewarding experience. And I was glad that I did go back. But that's when I really had the greatest satisfaction that there is a God, because when I was over there, they had too many Puerto Ricans. See, it was the United Nations, and they had too many Puerto Ricans that went over there. And they couldn't use them in our army because they all spoke Spanish. So since I knew Spanish, and I was an American soldier there, they gave them all to me. So I had a whole bunch of Puerto Ricans, and to take care of beside myself. So in our first battle, the first time we came against the Chinese, it was very, very difficult, the battle was raging there. And I said to myself, I want to get back home to that lady sitting over there. I want to get back to my children. I don't want to die out here. Some bullet come, that's it, Because over there in Korea, we fight on the mountains. And I've seen guys, being shot on the mountains, and I've seen them fall down and down and down and down, thousands of feet down into and they're way out and isolated in the mountains, we're fighting in the mountains. I said, they'll never be recovered. I don't think to this day that anybody would go all the way down that tree. You're in battle. You have no business going after somebody when your action is up here and you're needed up here, not down there. So at any rate, in my first engagement, I I saw it was rather difficult, what was going on. So I said this to God while I was leading my men and directing uh, the men in front of me. Some of the men was had their rifles and they're trying to uh, inject the shells in, and they was pointing the rifle at the other men, while they're trying. And I had to go and correct them. Hey, point your rifle up. Don't point it towards when you're trying to fix it or whatever it is.
Yes.
And you had to do all of that if you're a leader, a squad leader. You have to take care of your men, make sure they don't shoot their own selves, And when I during all of that attack, I said to myself, this is rough. I may not make it, But I said, well, I had faith and trust in God. So I said, while all the attack was going on, I said to myself, Lord, I said, I'm going to take my cartridge, bullets out of my rifle, everything. And I'm going to be just with my rifle. I don't have nothing to defend myself with. But I'm going to trust that even if I die here, that I'll get to go back to my family. But not, even if I die here, at least I'll die trusting you and knowing that you love me. And as soon, like I told my friend, I said, as soon as I made that decision and I took out all the cartridges, the bullets out of my rifle and stood there without anything defense whatsoever, as soon as I'd done that, just like this, a peace came over me. I wasn't afraid no more. Just like right now, there's nothing to be fear of. There I was in the middle of a battle with no fear whatsoever. And it was the most amazing thing for me to realize that you can do that and trust God that God will be your peace. He said he was your peace, our peace. And he was my peace at that particular time. And I had no fear whatsoever. There I was with all my men without any fear whatsoever. And this happened again in other engagements. When I was engaged again, I did the same thing. And again, the peace of God, that passes, the scripture says, the peace of God that passes all understanding. A lot of people don't understand that you can have peace in the middle of a storm.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus, he was on the ship, and the disciples, they said, Lord, Lord, wake us up, we perish, and the boy, Jesus said, where's your faith? They could overcome that. What was it? While they were in that ship, they just lost. They didn't trust God to take care of. When the faith of God is not something that only people in the Old Testament and New Testament use in their relationship with God, it is a fact that even now, your faith in God can overcome obstacles. This is, the scripture says, this is the victory that overcomes, even our faith. Through your faith, you can have victory over all things. Of course, it has to be the will of God. You can't have victory over something that is evil. But what I mean to say, you can't do evil things, and have victory over it. No. This speaks of victory in Christ Jesus, This is the victory that overcomes the world, Jesus said, even our faith. So I use the faith, and it helped me. It got me out of a many. In fact, I was in other battles that I became so reliant on God as for my protection that in the last time I was there in Korea, the last time the British were overrun by the Chinese, so they put us up to protect, to hold the line up when the British were defeated there, and they pushed us up in the 3rd Division to hold the line. When they did there, I dug my hole, and I put rocks all around, made a fortification, and I even stood on top of the rocks like John Wayne does sometimes. Here's what I said, come on, you know, I'm ready for you. In the name of Jesus, I'll defeat you communists, since communists did not know God, and they hated any Christians, you know. I said, and I'm here in the name of Jesus. Come on, you know. I was ready to die, you know, because faith had built it up in me so strong at the time that I was willing, you know, to be there and confront the enemy, the communist enemy, in the name of the Lord.
How were you treated in Korea by the other men? in your company?
Well, when you have the grace of God on you, and you come from a family who has committed their lives to the Lord, God gives you grace, regardless of where you're at, with whom you're at, or anything. The grace of God overcomes all racial barriers. You take, for instance, in the Old Testament, how Daniel was a prisoner in Babylon, and all of the God's servants and prophets were in enemy hands, yet God blessed them. You take how one of the men in the Bible, I think it was Joseph, if I'm not mistaken, became the second in the kingdom of the, you know, of the country that he was in, not because God favored him. God gave him the favor, and there he was in the enemy's stronghold and second in command. Yes. So if you have God's favor, and God's favor is applicable, well, I use a big word, applicable, today as it is in the Old Testament and New Testament times.
If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Ortega, showing us your medals and talking about your medals, and then I would like to switch back and talk about your family, your parents, and your brothers who also served in the military. So, if you want to stand up and or sit down, you can. However,
all of these medals are medals issued by the American government. They're American Defense. They're Purple Heart. This rifle is, I was in the infantry as infantry rifles, and this is the one I'm proud of. It's a Bronze Star Medal, and the next to that is a Silver Star Medal, which you know you can receive. Then of course you have your regular medals, but this here is the Prisoner of War Medal. This here is the United Nations Medal, and all these medals, each star is a battle star, which battles that you were in. This here is a unit citation. And if the unit you're in does a remarkable thing during the war in the units, they give you a citation. See, this citation is this one here. Now I have 2 oak leaf clusters, which means that I was in the unit that did 3 exceptional things. Every time you do an exception, they give you an oak leaf cluster. This here is a Philippine unit citation from the Philippine government. When your unit in the Philippine Island does it. And this here is a Korean unit citation. In Korea, when your units do exceptional things during the war, there are a lot of units fighting, but when the unit does something exceptional, victoriously in the war, when then you're awarded, your unit is awarded these awards.
Well, that's wonderful. What I would like to do is switch now and talk about your family, your parents, your upbringing, what your childhood was like growing up in the Depression.
My grandfather and an uncle were born in Mexico, Guadalajara, in that area, way down in southern Mexico. Way back in the 1800s, when there was very few evangelical Christians, I would say. They weren't Catholic. The evangelical Christians, they were Christian, they believed in God and the Lord, and they had received a salvation from God, and they wanted to carry the good news that God is good, that He saves, that He gives you eternal life, and they wanted to bring this news to a town that was nearby, and the people of that town rejected their news of eternal life and salvation by the Lord Jesus Christ, and they were stoned, and the uncle was left for dead, stoned, piled rocks on him and cactus, and my grandfather was also stoned and left for dead, and there was also a younger person with them, but he took off. He escaped and ran to the next village and told them about what had happened. So the officials of the next town came, and they jailed all these people that had done this thing against my family. Well, that it traces my father and my mother were both believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, in God, and
What were their names and where were they born?
Deborah was my mother's name, and my father's name was Reuben, and they lived partly through the Mexican Revolution, but they managed to come to El Paso, Texas, through the immigration.
Yes.
They applied for all of the paperwork, and they were approved to come here. They didn't cross the river or anything like that, you know. They approved the right way.
And what was your father's profession?
My father, at the time he came to the United States, was a professor at the institute there in El Paso, Texas. For a while, he was educated, and later on, he acquired work for the Texas Tuberculosis Association. Among the Mexican population here in Texas, they were dying, because of tuberculosis. It was an epidemic, and it was very difficult, to get rid of the epidemic. So the Tuberculosis Association hired my father to go to educate the Mexican people about how to prevent tuberculosis, what to do, how to live, and so that was his undertaking for some 30 some odd years.
Yeah, that was in El Paso or in Austin?
Well, no, he came to Austin, and the state headquarters was here in Austin, so he came to Austin, and that's where he was hired. So he made speeches and health talks in the whole state of Texas. They gave him a truck. They gave a motion picture that he showed motion moving pictures, and there was the old time where you use the car battery to for the electricity for the movies. It was way back in the 1920s, and he's in 1919 when he started, because that's when I was born. He always told me that he started working for the Texas Tuberculosis Association when I was born, and I was born in 1919. So it was his job to go all over Texas, wherever he could, wherever there were Mexican Americans, and teach them about how to avoid tuberculosis, how to boil all of your cooking utensils, all your spoons and forks, how to separate the tuberculosis patient away from the family.
Yes.
Give him his own utensils and separate him from the other family. And all of the health hazards that they had to avoid. And he showed motion pictures. He did lectures, and he was very educated. In fact, he represented the United States Health Department in Mexico
Uh-huh.
at one particular time, because the American Health Department here, the not the state, but the whole U.S. Health Department, they didn't have any Spanish-speaking personnel. So when they had conventions or had to go to a foreign country, they had to have someone that would uh, speak the language.
Yes.
And my father was always available for that. And he studied in Ann Arbor, Michigan, courses and things like that. So he was educated.
And this was through the Depression. He continued to
yes,
work.
and he did all that work. He went to cities and towns and speaking and giving lectures on how to avoid the TB germ. And he was well known all over Texas at the time.
About how many years did he do that?
He did that for about 30 years, I guess.
30 years.
Until the tuberculosis was eliminated.
Mhm.
And they took more interest in the TB patient. They built hospitals for TB patients. In fact, here in San Antonio, one of the main hospitals for TB.
Yes.
Of course, since it was eradicated, they have other diseases they take care of, but not TB. But they say sometimes that TB does come back in certain areas, of the country.
What about your siblings? I know you had 5 brothers.
Yes, my brothers.
Sisters.
Well, we come from an athletic family, I would say, because since we didn't have to go pick cotton, go up north, pick vegetables like most Mexican Americans did from poor families. Since my father was well educated, we spent a lot of our time in sports, and then we didn't have to go to the fields or anything. And so all of my brothers, one of my brothers went to the University of Texas, and 3 of my brothers went to the University of Texas, and they were well educated. One of my brothers wrote the school song for the University of Texas. The Orange Jackets at the time, they had girls' orange jackets at the time.
Yes.
That was way back in the 30s. And he wrote the song, their song. And my other brother was a war hero. He has a school in Austin named after him out there off of Webbville Road. And 2 of my brothers made All-State in basketball, since we were all in sports. And one of my brothers still holds the record there at University of Texas. After the World War II, he went to the UT, and he played baseball. He still holds the record of more hits in the games against Hard.
And which brother was that?
My brother Reuben.
Reuben.
His record has not been broken since 1946.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
And of course, I and my brother Benjamin, another Benjamin, we were very ignorant when it came to schooling. I made all bad grades, and we weren't meant to be scholars or anything like that. And of course,
What schools did you go to?
Austin High School. I graduated from Austin High School, and the only thing that I did there was I was the art editor for their high school book. It was quite a large high school, 3 stories.
Yeah.
Very large high school with thousands of students, and I was selected as the art editor of their high school, of their yearbook, and I do all the drawings of the high school.
Great.
And 2 of my other brothers, they were all staying in basketball, and one of my brothers was the champions marble champion. He was like me. We didn't go very high.
And which
in
brother was that?
school. My brother Benjamin.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he fought from Africa all the way to Germany during World War II. But in those days, as we were growing up, there was a lot of discrimination against the Mexican Americans. We didn't feel it so much, and we come from
In school or just in
everywhere,
Austin in general?
everywhere. And but if you had the grace of God, your family had the grace of God, you could manage very well, and you didn't have all of that discrimination as others did.
did you experience some? Were you segregated in school, or experience
Not so
some
much
some
segregation.
discrimination
Not
from
so
your
much.
teachers?
Others
or-
did,
Uh-huh.
very much so,
Uh-huh.
because, but like I said, we had the favor of God, and you have the favor of God. You don't receive so much discrimination. God bless you, regardless of where you at or where you are attending.
Were there instances where you felt discriminated against at Austin High or John
Well,
Allen Junior High?
Well, a little incident. Like my brother was a school champion marble. In those
Uh-huh.
days, the tops and marbles were
Mhm.
as common as anything. And I went to with him. They have the whole city of Austin. They had a contest, a marble contest. Well, I was there, and when he eliminated all the other schools, at the last moment, at the last uh, school, the person he had competed with, at the last moment, my brother, he won the marble contest. But since he was a Mexican American, they gave it to the person that he defeated
Oh my!
rather than my brother.
Wow.
See, I was the only Mexican American. He was my brother. I was there. All the rest were white children. And I noticed what they did. They didn't give it to my brother. They gave it to the person. That was discrimination. Things like that always happen. But oh well, of course, uh, that was at the particular time. Now it's a lot different. It's not like it was before. But there still is a lot of discrimination, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Even whites discriminate against whites themselves. So it's
Let's talk about your when you were in the war. You had mentioned that your mom in Austin was a gold star.
my mother was a Gold Star mother. There was 7 of us brothers in the war there from Austin, and they awarded her a prize, but she never received it.
Oh my!
Never received. They just awarded it. Big ceremonies. My mother was be presented this and that and the other, but she never received it. They just give it to her.
So there were
But
7 on you.
yes, and in our windows there was 7 stars.
Uh-huh.
In those days, if you had a son, you had a star in your window.
It was 5 natural brothers and an adopted.
Yeah, we had no. There was 7 altogether. We had adopted. My mother and dad had adopted a boy and a girl, and that boy also was in the service in World War II.
So he
So,
was one of the
yeah.
7, or
No, he was. No, he was not counted in that.
What do you think it was like for your parents to have 7 of
7
you
in the war.
in the war?
Well, they trusted God, and that helped so much. Of course, they didn't know about me. They didn't know whatever happened to me during the war.
When was the last time they heard from you
they-
then?
Well, when I wrote them a letter, I think, after I got to the Philippine Islands, but
And then
other than that, the war started and they never heard from me. So they didn't know whether I was alive or well. I remember very well that when the war was over and I came home, they permitted us 3 minutes to talk back home to our parents. So I got on the phone and I said, in Spanish, I said, "Mother, this is Abel, your son." And there was a pause on the telephone, like she didn't recognize my voice. Well, you see, I was a youngster when I left. When I was 21. And when I came back, I was 26. So naturally, your voice changes. So she didn't recognize my voice. I said, "Mama, I want you, when you get home, when I get home, I want you to make me some frijoles, some tacos, some enchiladas, And then she knew who I was.
So I mentioned a few of her goodies, that she used to make so good for us. Oh, Abelito. She used to call me Abelito. You see, of all of my brothers, I was the only one that would help mom. You see, my brother was always playing ball, and all out there. Mother would ask him to go to the store for her. Oh, no, mama, I'm playing ball. La, 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 la. They would never. Then she'd call me, Abelito. I said, yes, ma'am. I want you to go to the store. Yes, ma'am. I would say, I would always go where mama wanted me to go. I never, said no to her. So she loved me. But before I say any more, she was pregnant with all of my brothers, before they were born. But when she was pregnant with me, she cried. She cried and cried and cried when she was pregnant with me. And she couldn't understand why she cried so much when she was pregnant with me. But I guess I assume. So when she cried, she took more care of me than she did my other brothers. So I was the fattest one of all of my brothers. But she fed me good. She didn't know why she cried, but she took special care to me. I guess she loved me so much that I just returned that love to her. So I assumed that it was because I was going to be lost as a prisoner of war. And she was already feeding it, and while she was pregnant. But it all turned out for the best. It all turned out for the best.
When you came home for the war, you did go back to Austin. What was your first job, or were you working before the war?
I did. I know you used to go to like Cress's or Woolworths,
Sure.
and they had little souvenirs, little things. San Antonio, Texas. They would have a little Texas man with blue bonnets painted on there, and little souvenirs that you could take back home. Well, I did all those. I did the little maps with little painted little blue bonnets, and did other little souvenir things.
That was before the war?
Yeah, that was before I went to the war. That's what I was doing there. I did that for a sign company. They would do that on the side, and we'd put them in boxes, sell them to Cress's and Woolworths, and they would dispense with them there. But that's what I did during the war, and also, well, that's what I did during the war. But
Before the war.
yeah, before the war.
And then after the war, when you went back
Well,
to Austin.
I wanted to learn the cleaning and pressing business. So I started working there at Kelly Smith there in Austin, Texas. And to learn I had to learn the wet cleaning, the dry cleaning, and how to run the machinery and all of that. So that's why I went there to Kelly Smith to learn. And the government paid for me to learn job training. And I learned also to clean fur coats. And I also learned how to block clean hats, and how to shake hats, how to mate hats too. And that's what I did after the war.
How do you think the war affected other Mexican Americans?
Well, it affected them in a great way, because you see, the Mexican American was not educated. They were not into the management positions of any kind. They weren't educated in workforce. So when the war came, and after the war, the government permitted them to receive money to go to school. So quite a number of them took the advantage of the schooling. The government paid for all the schooling. And if you wanted to learn a trade, you could get into the trade. The government would pay you, to learn the trade, as they did with me. And it improved the workforce among the Americans. And a lot of the Mexican Americans went to school. They went to high school. They started going to college, and it just brought up the educational level of the Mexican Americans. They also used to run around with old beat up cars, and have their a different lifestyle. But now I don't see any more Mexican Americans running around with bad cars. They all have brand new cars, just like the rest of the population. It was they they self-educated themselves. They learned. They went to the University of Texas, and their lifestyle improved after World War II, little by little by little. Now in Austin, I'll read the paper where a lot of the Mexican Americans are in top positions there in the city government, and that's what the situation is there now, as I see it. Same here in in San Antonio, same thing here.
Do you think that the Chicano movement of the 1960s, do you think that helped or hindered Mexican Americans?
And what movement are you talking about?
The Chicano
Oh, Chicano.
movement.
I never paid much attention to the Chicano. I didn't even like the word Chicano.
Okay.
I care not for the Chicano at all. My interest more was in their spiritual upbringing rather than their normal material scholastic undertakings. You know, it's better to know about where you're going to spend eternity rather than, where you're going to spend your lifetime and miss out on an eternity that Jesus paid the price for.
Let's talk about your marriage. After the war,
After the war,
you got married.
after the war, I worked in San Antonio, and like I said, I was interested in the cleaning and
Mhm.
business, so I worked there a little while with a friend of ours there, and he owned a cleaning place there.
In San Antonio or
In
Austin?
San Antonio,
Uh-huh.
here in San Antonio. And while I was here, I received a letter from my wife, Naomi. You see, her sister married a Catholic, see, and her father was not a Catholic. So during World War II, when I was in the prison camp, I received 2 letters, one from my dad, one from Naomi's father. See,
So your parents knew that you were there.
What's that?
Your parents knew that you were
they just wrote it in case I
just
get the
in
letter.
case.
They didn't know
Oh,
I was
I see.
in case. Well, he wrote too, because his other daughter, Amalia, which is Naomi's sister, was going to marry a Catholic, and he did not want his daughter to marry a Catholic.
Mhm.
So he wrote me a letter while I was in prison camp, trying to persuade me, tried to persuade me to enter into some relationship with his daughter. He was that fanatic. He didn't want her to marry because he had known me back in Austin when I lived there. So
Uh-huh.
he had known me at one time.
And when did you meet Naomi?
And Naomi, well, I was single after World War II, and my brother Reuben bought a Ford and had a motor rebuilt, and we started to take a trip to Mexico City. And while we was going to Mexico City in the car, I told my brother, stop here in Dilley, Texas, where she lived. I said, I want to go to Mr. Rodriguez's house, the one that wrote me a letter. I want to go to Mr. Rodriguez and thank him for his letter, while I was in prison, because he was the only one that wrote to me other than my dad. So I went to the house where she was at, and she came to the door, Naomi. She was just 17, I think, years old. How old were you? 18. She was 18 years old. She came to the door, and I said, is Mr. Rodriguez here? I'd like to see him, please, And she yelled back at her, Mother, where is Dad, And she told him where Dad was, And so I said, well, I'm going to Mexico City. My brother will be back. Maybe we'll catch him here at the time, So she turned around and walked. She was barefooted, and she's still barefooted. And she walked around, and I stayed the screen. Wow, wow. She was young, beautiful, appeared. So I told her, I'll be back, next time around. Yeah. Well, her daddy told her to write to me while I was in San Antonio. So she wrote a letter. He still wanted uh, to do, he still wanted to marry his daughter off to someone that he knew. He knew my family. He knew my father. So he wanted to marry his daughter to marry to a good family. And that's the reason that he had her write to me. I answered her letter. We wrote a few letters back and forth. And she invited me to go to Dilley, Texas, where she was from. So I went down there to Scarborough's. I don't know if you remember
Yes,
6th Street.
I remember Scarborough's.
And I bought me a gabardine coat, overcoat in those days. It was kind of cool. And I had me a hat, and I thought I was some big shot. He's going to sleep over there. Anyway, I went to Dilley, and I got off the train there, and I met her. And then she came to Austin to meet me. And we went to church, when she came to Austin. And there was a little creek there before we got to the church. And it's the kind you step on this stone, then you get across.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I stepped okay. And then she missed a rock, and all her foot ran into the water.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yes. And so she jerked it off as any farm girl does. And we went to church, and they introduced to her, in the church, they introduced the people that just came in, visitors, And the preacher said, "Oh, do we have any visitors here?" And one of the members of the church said, "Yes, we have a young lady here from Dilley, Texas. Dilley, Texas. Well, the service is in Spanish, see. Now, if you say Dile, it means tell her. That's what the word means. Dile means tell her. And then he said, "Yeah, we have a person here, and she's from Dile." And the preacher said, "Dile. What shall I tell her? Dile. ¿Qué le digo?" He said. "What shall I tell her?" He said, "No, she's from Dilley, Texas." So the whole church just laughed like everything. And finally, we corresponded back and forth, and I went down to ask for. In those days, you asked for the hat. You don't run off from somewhere. So I went down there, and they knew I was coming. And I asked the father and mother for the hand of their daughter, and the mother started crying there. She didn't want to lose her only daughter at the time. But they gave me permission to marry, and we got married there in Dilley, Texas. And we lived happily ever after.
How many children did you have?
7 children.
Uh-huh.
7 children, yes.
And how do you think your children's lives were different than your life?
Oh, very different from our life. We did a lot of struggling. When we were first married, we rode the bus. We didn't have any transportation. And we also bought our first car. And we didn't have hardly very much finance to run a car. In fact, my tires, the engine tube was sticking out of the tire, and I would put cardboard in the holes to keep the rubber from hitting some nail or something, explode. Well, we were happy together, but we started the way down on the bottom of the totem pole. But God has been good to us. I'm glad we went through all of these experiences. It helps you to become a better father to your children. because you knew what you went through. You knew that they have it a lot more easier than you did. And all of my children have turned out to be very well. Some are well educated. Some of them have very important jobs here in San Antonio.
Such as?
Well, one of my daughters is at the Brooks Randolph Brooks Credit Union.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, she's one of the big shops there. Vice president of that. Then she goes on to come here. Just came back from California, visiting Washington and all that. She has a very important job. She also just barely had a little high school education and 1 or 2 years college. But that's where the grace of God comes in. It's not how much you got up here. It's how much He gives you up there. And when you acknowledge that, you get ahead a lot more than if you try to do it on your own. And anyway, all my other daughters, one of my daughters was married to an air pilot, and they went all over Europe, and he used to drive the generals around their airplanes and all that. And she has a bachelor's degree also in literature and all of that. And she's real happy. And all the others have married officers in the Air Force. And my son works for State Farms. He's one of the top people there here in San Antonio. And
And you have a couple of daughters who are teachers, your wife was telling me.
We have Yvonne, who's a teacher here.
Yes.
And she's a granddaughter.
Oh, a granddaughter.
Yeah, she teaches math here above high school.
Oh, they're all. And one daughter's a police officer.
Yes, Diane. Yeah. And there's another thing. When you have the grace of God, when you have God's support, you see, in the scripture, it reveals that the police persons are ministers of God. They execute judgment. They do not hold their sword in vain, the scripture says. Which means God is the one who has his own police force to execute judgment upon those that need that execution, say. So she's that type of police person. She's not a big person. She just weighs 110 or 15 pounds. Little girl. But when a 300-pound man comes after her, all she does is stick her finger at him, tell him to stop. And he stops. It's not because of her. It's because of what comes from above. See?
What advice would you give future generations?
About
Just about life. What advice would
Well,
you give? Say you're
where are you
talking
going
about
to
your
where are you
great-grandchildren.
going to spend eternity? I have faced death many times on the wars as a prisoner of war and during the Korean Wars. I have faced death many, and I found out this: when you have the security of eternal life that abides in you, it doesn't make any difference. It does not make any difference whether you die now, you're killed now, whatever. Your eternity is secured. You go to be with the creator of heaven and earth. You get to be with his son. That's the most important thing. God created us for his pleasure. That's the word about it. He created man for his own pleasure. And if we give him that pleasure, to be his son, that really is something. But security, eternal security, is the most important word for a human being on there. So when he dies, he knows where he's going to spend eternity. If you don't know him, I just read the Bible this morning. If you don't know him and you don't accept him, I hate to tell you what the scripture says, that you're going to go. You're not going to go to be with him. You're going to go to the other place. and I don't want to go there. Nobody should go there. And eternity is the most important thing that a human being can associate himself with. Where is he going to go when he dies? This life is short. Eternity is eternity, forever and forever and forever. And you want to be where God wants you to be in eternity. And you make that decision here on earth. We didn't make the decisions when we were born on this earth. We had nothing to do with making that decision of being born into this earth. But we do make a decision where we're going after we leave this earth. And that's the most important thing, I think, that a person should know.
Is there anything else that you want to add to our interview? Anything else that you would like to say that you haven't said? Anything else you would like to talk about the war or about anything, your family or anything else?
That's it, eternity. I can't think of anything in place of eternity. Things, your life has meaning only when God intervenes in our lives. Other than that, you're either a crook, you're either going to hell as it is, or you're going to be far away from God and spend eternity in a place where you should not, God never meant for you to be. We send ourselves there. God doesn't send us there. We make that choice here on earth. And I pray that everybody makes the right choice. It's a beautiful life, knowing God, knowing the Lord. I'm here today because of His grace and His mercy.
Are you involved in any organizations or
I'm a
anything?
chaplain for the American ex-prisoners of war here in San Antonio.
Yes.
And when we have ceremonies at Fort Sam Houston, at times I'm the one who either gives the benediction or the opening prayer there. At times, And in fact, just the other day, they asked me to speak there, at Fort Sam Houston. But I told them I wasn't going to be here. But at times, yes. And I'm the chaplain there for the American ex-prisoners of war. And it's something I cherish because I was just reading the Word of God, that God takes the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. That's in the book of Corinthians. He takes ordinary people, regardless of, okay, they look foolish to you, to confound the wise people, the intelligent people who think they know it all. But God takes just simple people to confuse them by giving these people the knowledge of salvation, of how to know Him. But the intelligent man, he knows it all. He doesn't have that ability to reflect. Not that there are not people that are intelligent or rich that don't know Jesus. There are many, 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 many wonderful people. Regardless of their place in life, they know God. They know Jesus. They have accepted Him as their Lord and their Savior.
Well, thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Mr. Ortega, for this wonderful interview.
Thank you
Thank you.
for letting me speak and to have those prisoners who died in these prison camps, that died horrible deaths, serving their country, and that very few people know about what they went through. And that war in the Pacific that we were in, that very few people knew what happened to those men who were overwhelmed by a Japanese horde of soldiers who were evil men, evil soldiers, but who faced them and faced with courage and determination. And not only that, through all those years, they came out victorious over them. Wake up, Galindo. Wake up.